Hello, everybody. Good night, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the debate. We're going to have a debate tonight, and you can call in to these debates. Debate. Mr. Dr. Verified himself at 709. We're in Canada. I hope that's okay. You can text me. I can call you 740-4076. Now, United Nations is not going to do something like that. They're not going to hey, call in. Let's have a debate. Unfortunately, if they do it, then this controlled opposition is going to call in with seeded questions, right? Okay, so we got a really good... Now, there's a bad story out today. Let me talk about that for 1 second. We're going to play a song here, start the show off. You know, a wave of truth. Conference of Party 30 targets disinformation threat to climate action. And so what a wave of truth, in other words, they're going to flood the planet with their narrative, and they have 12 countries just signed on. This is a new thing. And they're just going to silence any dissenting voices. And their logic, and we're going to go through that. I'm going to show you why they say there's global warming, because they won't tell us. They won't just come out and tell us. I got the evidence. They're going to show it to you right away. We're going to go through that story. It's a painful story to get through. We're just going to keep going through it. And you can call into these and tell me I'm wrong. You can do videos and show everybody how wrong I am. I'm going to give you my narrative on radioactive fallout. And should United Nations Conference of Parties 30 prove, instead of censoring people, that carbon, not 80 years of radioactive fallout, is global warming? So I know they're targeting me because I'm the only person with that narrative. And so they're not going to put up with anybody. That's what that story is all about. It's really shocking response to a debate, to questioning their narrative. Instead of debunking them, okay, silly, it looks like this. Instead of coming and debunk them, it's so simple, we're just, next. No, they're going to silence every voice out there, unless you agree with their narrative that carbon is the problem. Now, carbon, you need more carbon. We need more birds, more insects, more trout in the ponds. We need more fish in the ocean. That's carbon. Never ends. Here we go. It's a rather important story. That's where we're going to challenge it. I'm going to start off with a song, The Scientist and the Blob. This is a song in relationship, in the context of the die-offs on the ocean. What's causing? The scientist version is there's some magic blob out there, and everything it touches dies. There is only one element on this planet with that particular attribute. It's called radiation. I'll be back after the song. It's not a very long song. It's a fantastic song. On James Luce's site on YouTube.
The birds washed up, feathers torn, scientists mumble. Eyes are worn, shake their heads, say what went wrong. Check the numbers, drag it along. They write their books, shake their hands, watch it sink into the sand. Call it heat, call it tide, call it anything but the crime. The blob don't burn, the blob don't kill, but the core still burn and the waste still spills. things fill.
Here we go. Strap yourselves in and hang on tight. This is going to be fun. So what is United Nations narrative? Well, the scientists all agree, Dana. Oh, okay. But what's their narrative? What is it? How is carbon causing global warming? Scientists all agree, Dana, that's what's happening. And if you keep asking questions, we're just going to have to censor you. We own Canada. We own 195 countries. We will censor you. No debate allowed. No conversation allowed. No dissenting voices allowed. How come? Why don't you just debunk us? Wallace Brocker. There's 4 papers, 4 studies written by 4 basically weirdos. Wallace Brocker is the interview with the father of global warming. Not United Nations, Wallace Brocker. That's the father of global warming right there. You heard global warming a few times, I bet. You bet your ass you did. All right, so we got Wallace Brocker, rather. He's got a pretty cushy job for selling his paper, giving his paper to United Nations to use to bludgeon humanity with. Who else done that, I wonder? Oh, there was a guy called, what was his name? Miles Allen. I'm sorry, Professor Miles Allen now. He's the physicist behind net zero. You heard of net zero? The United Nations didn't come up with that. They did. This guy. United Nations, all they say is, well, the science is settled, ain't it? Mr. and Mrs. blah, blah, blah. How about carbon footprint? Was that United Nations? No. That was an advertising campaign by BP Oil. How can we bring your footprint down? BP Oil. All the media ran this story because they had a big oil spill. And they wanted to blame you for it. They did. And got away with it. The idea of a personal carbon footprint was popularized by a large advertising campaign from the fuel company BP Oil in 2005. The idea was to divert attention away from the fossil fuel industry onto the individual consumers. So that's what United Nations is doing, right? Okay. So there's 4 papers. There's Wallace Brocker, father of global warming, which means there's got to be a father of climate change too, right? We'll get to him. There's the father of net zero, big shot net zero guy. BP Oil ran a campaign to blame you, and carbon footprint will never go away ever again. There it is right there. You might as well put your foot by it because you're going to pay for it. That's what they want you to pay for right now. James Edward Hansen has to do Professor Miles Allen every night to get a place to sleep. He's best known for his 15-minute presentation at Congress on climate change. That's right, James Hansen. And global warming. Forgot about that, didn't you? Not for long, you hear it everywhere. So global warming comes from James Hansen. Not NASA, but James Hansen. He gave a paper and he done a 15-minute speech at Congress. And that 15-minute speech was the catalyst, that assertion, with no dissenting voices, was their confidence. It wasn't a random, it was man-made. That was the turning point in the history of global climate change. Not UN, not conference of parties. No. Hansen's testimony was pivotal and marked the official beginning. You all doing it, mate? Of global warming policy debate. So there. Slave. All right, let's do that one more time. An interview with the father of global warming, Wallace Brocker, Professor Miles Allen, the father of net zero. Does this sound familiar to you? Global warming, net zero, carbon footprint? How can we get yours down? James Hansen. 15-minute speech marked the official beginning, the very first time of global warming policy debate. So when you ask United Nations and they say the science is settled, well, it's not. There's 4 people who wrote papers and they were never challenged. Right, next. I just debunked the UN. Have a nice day. We'll see you in 1,000 years, because I'll be censored for at least that long. So you got one more time, then we'll move on. We'll get into the crazies. We'll come back to that. We got lots of time for that stuff. By the way, don't go eating food from Japan, for goodness sakes. The food was banned by 55 countries for over a decade in 14 prefectures. That's half the country. They're huge prefectures. You're talking about 14 billion pounds of rice was still grown and shipped worldwide. Air travel industry emissions fall outside the scope of Conference of Parties 26. Outside the scope, really. But it's not outside their scope to tax everybody for everything for here on out, is it? Except for the airlines and the military. Don't want to piss off the military. I hear you, man. All right. Back to, because you don't want to pick on the military. The military is out there dumping depleted uranium munitions all over your planet, just in target practice. Not to mention what they've done. Oh my goodness! I'll get to that in a little bit. A wave of truth. Conference of Parties 30 targets disinformation. What's disinformation? Anything that don't go with what the United Nations assertion is. That they don't want to argue about, they can't have a debate about. They can't debunk anybody who questions them on it, because the paper was written by 4 people. 4 different people that weren't even part of United Nations. We want that. Give him a job in the university and give us the exclusive rights to the net zero stuff. What was it again? Net zero? Yeah, net zero. We need that. Go get that. Like the Holy Bible for a control grid. So now they're going to silence everybody worldwide. They're not going to have a debate with anybody. Whoa, no. Debate shit. Debate jack shit. A wave of truth. COP30 targets disinformation threat. A threat has to be met with force, right? We're a threat. Anybody wants to have a conversation? Anybody asks them, well, what's the science? Are you freaking stupid? Wait, the science is settled. It's published in association with the United Nations /weirdos. Negotiators in Brazil opened Conference of Parties 30 with a stark warning. The race to avert a catastrophic global heating, which is what chemtrails do, by the way, to keep the heat trap down, right? Melt the glaciers for you. But the emissions from the nuclear power plants and nuclear testing and everything else, what we're going to talk about tonight, I'm going to give you the others. Just let me go through their story, their version of what they're going to do to you from here on out. They came out a swinging this morning, I'll tell you what. The race to avert a catastrophic global heating is being sabotaged by a surge of climate disinformation. Climate disinformation. Okay, well, what's the real information? Tell us what it is. Let's hear it. No. If you don't know what it is, then there's something wrong with you. You need to be censored. It's being sabotaged by a surge of climate disinformation. Okay, well, what's the truth? I read the whole article. They didn't bother telling you what is climate change. Falsehoods spreading faster than ever. Threatens to derail the fragile progress on climate action. Fragile progress. Progress! Never mind, let's just read their version first before I challenge it. Lula, Brazil's president, set the tone. This guy is just a Ponzi scheme all on his own. He's hobnobbing with all these unbelievably influential people. Like they built this contraption. They tore up the forest, the Amazon forest, for 8 miles. Built a road in there because the delegates didn't want to go anywhere in the slums. Brazil. They were terrified. No matter which hotel he went to, some of them would get jacked, maybe murdered. Just but everyday thieves, right? So then who's going to be the biggest thief in a country like that, I wonder? Oh, that'll be the president, Lulu. Nice name there. Declaring that the battle for truth had become just as critical as the fight to cut emissions. The battle to cut emissions. So CO2, I'm guessing, they won't tell you. You got to kind of guess, right? It's a big puzzle. Declaring that the battle for truth had become just as critical as the fight to cut emissions. Oh, you mean carbon? Gas, oil, and coal. The emissions are carbon. Carbon. Which is what all the trees and birds and insects and plants and biota and puppies and pizzas and everything else is made of. Carbon. If we don't got carbon, it looks like the moon. So if you got more carbon, you're going to kill the planet. You're not going to have more trees, more birds, more insects, because carbon is the recycling of life, right? Species die. You got to get the material for the next generation of species somewhere. It's called carbon. Is that like stupid or something? Does that concept escape everybody or something? Conference of Parties 30 must mark a new defeat for climate denialists. Well, climate change is real, but it ain't caused by carbon, for goodness sakes. Just keep going. I'll respond after we get through this disaster that is assault upon everybody that has a question. If you got a question, you got a problem. You're in trouble. Constipated Party 30 years of accomplished nothing, must mark a new defeat, they're calling you the enemy, for climate denialist. Climate denialist. Well, it's clear the climate has changed, right? We got supercell typhoons, supercell hurricanes, supercell cyclones, typhoons, hurricanes. And the reason we got that is this all showed up post-Fukushima. We had 36 reactor cores in 4 buildings and 8 fuel pools. 3 decades of reactor cores at the top of the buildings of the 4 buildings were lost. And so there's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger, we'll get to that can defend against anthropogenic man-made radiation fallout. And because I didn't mean to bring it up, I just want to get through their narrative first. I got it burned into my memory today. So, by the way, just because I made an assertion, I need to prove that what I said was true. So, Reactor 3 at Fukushima, this was a 190-foot, 65-meter, 19-story skyscraper. And this is a model, exact model of it. The fuel and the reactor cores and the fuel pools are at the top of the buildings. The 2 red depictions up there are the fuel pools. And of course, right here is the reactor core. And so every decade, there's about 5.5, 5 3/4, 6 reactor cores stored at the top of the building. So that's one reactor core. And so we'll see they're 30 plus years old. So let's say there's 8 reactor cores at the top of each of the buildings. Well, you can see the top of the building is gone. So these are not opinions or conjectures. Let's keep going. Let's just finish the madness that they wrote today and put out today. Signed on to the first ever declaration. This is the very first time, showed up this morning. This is the first we've ever heard of it. And they were brainstorming all night, I guess, on information integrity on climate change. Because the science is settled, but you don't need to know what the science is. You just need to know that the science is settled. Now, at the beginning, as I showed you, where their narratives come from. They won't tell you that's where they got it to, but clearly what I showed you, and I'll show you again and again before the night is out, that the 4 papers were written by people that didn't work for United Nations, and those 4 papers were used to bludgeon humanity with nonstop ever since they got their hands on them. And they didn't come up with it. United Nations and their thousands of subsidies didn't come up with it. UNSCLEAR and IRPA and the IPRC, the International Atomic Energy Agency, blah, 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 never came up with that. It was 4 individuals: Wallace Brocker, Miles Allen, James Hansen, and BP Oil, carbon footprint, right? I'll show you that again really soon, right after we get through this what nightmare we got right here. The first ever declaration on information integrity on climate change. Pledging to fight back against the flood of false content. Well, what is it? Where is it to? I actually can't find it out there anywhere. Everybody's censored anyway. Always have been. And this year is no different than last year, the year before, right? No one knows I exist. And because another narrative is not allowed. And protect those on the front lines of truth. Protect those from the truth. On the front line of truth, from the truth. From having, you don't have to worry about the media. It's no good for them to tell me they're worried about the media. So you got Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Spain signed on to the first ever declaration of information integrity on climate change, pledging to fight back against the flood of false content and protect those on the front lines of truth. Yeah, I said truth, I know. Truth. And protect those on the front line of truth, environmental justice, scientists and researchers. We got to babysit them. We got to shield them from anybody that asks us questions. Scientists don't like people that ask questions. Researchers don't like people that answer questions. Journalists absolutely can't handle somebody asking the question, why are you asking me that question for? I kill you. So on Wednesday, yesterday, 12 nations, including, not limited to any of these 10 though, all 195 signature countries are going to come on board. They just cooked this up over a cup of tea the other day, including Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, and Spain. There's 12 nations. There's a few of them. The first ever declaration of information integrity on climate change and the internet. So they're going to scrub or delete or just permanently ostracize any dissenting voices. The declaration unveiled under the Global Initiative for Information Integrity on Climate Change calls for concrete steps to dismantle networks of climate law. Networks? What are you talking about? You own the media, you own the universities, you own the social medias worldwide. You have 195 countries that are captured by UN, the military-industrial complex. Call for concrete steps to dismantle networks of climate laws and shield evidence-based voices from harassment and attacks. So evidence-based voices can't be asked a question, or nobody's allowed to question their narratives. So who's ever out there with United Nations official sanction, nobody's allowed to exist to question their narratives. Isn't that interesting? So they're not going to have a debate with anybody. They're not interested in a debate. They need to silence every dissenting voices out there and shield the because you got to realize how big United Nations is. So the majority of the people are actually compartmentalized, right? They're surrounded by yes people, and they're cultured through university, and they're usually rejects that just got degree after degree after degree, and finally got some intelligence agency or nuclear industry assets come in and recruit them, right? And they get a lot of money. They're treated really nice. They feel important for the first time in their entire life. They're no longer left behind like all the other students. And they are the most useful idiots. They're typically autistic, functioning autistic. They can dress themselves, drive themselves, but they're functionally autistic. And shield evidence-based voices from harassment and attacks. And shield, protect at all costs. So the only way they can shield them is to stop you from asking any questions. To make sure the only questions they're getting through are part of that narrative. 100% controlled opposition in every facet of the journalists, the so-called journalists, are having pains of conscience. The journalists are asking them real questions, and so they need to, well, somebody must have said it to them. They shouldn't be asked that question. And we got some examples of it over years, haven't we? Well, like the interview's over. You got to answer like the piece of paper said. Evidence-based voices. Shield the evidence-based voices. But what's the evidence? It's four papers. It's the strangest thing imaginable. Hang on. It's so freaking long, I got to delete that part. So let me refresh you on it. I'll try to be nice. So Wallace Brocker is the father of global warming. Miles Allen wrote the paper on net zero. BP Oil ran a campaign on carbon footprint. So net zero, carbon footprint, global warming, and the official climate change hoster, James Hansen. Was an important turning point. His 15-minute testimony in his paper was snatched up. All of these papers by those four individuals were snatched up by the United Nations, and that's their evidence-based, and nobody's allowed to debate any of this. But nobody has. Science should be debated. Hansen's testimony was an important turning point in the history of global climate change. His testimony was a pivotal and the official beginning of the global warming policy debate. So it all started with James Hansen paper. That was never peer review and was never challenged. So Wallace Brocker was global warming. Father net zero, Miles Allen. BP Oil was carbon footprint. James Hansen was climate change, Mr. Global climate change himself. So that's the four papers that are being used to bludgeon humanity with. And now the chicken X, who even, like if you have one brave person walk in front of these chicken X, pretend this is United Nations. If you had one brave person who knew how to fight step in front of these people, the line would split. You would break that guard very easily. They only got that look on the face because there's nobody in front of them. They can't handle a actual debate. So if I went into a debate using that evidence, what does the audience perceive all of a sudden? That United Nations wasn't in charge. They stole people's papers and then used that to bludgeon humanity with. And I'm going to show you, keep going, from harassment and attacks. You wouldn't attack them, you wouldn't have to harass them if you would have a debate. The Secretary for Digital Policy said the goal is simple but urgent: to create a wave of truth. To create a wave of truth. The initiative, launched in June, is a partnership between Brazil, the UN Department of Global Communications, and UN. UNESCO is UN, which is the schools and universities and everything else. Global Communications is all the schools and everything else. UN Department of Global Communication. So they got two of their own there, and Brazil, which is part of UN, right? So all three of them are UN. Disinformation driven by political worldviews, fueling political extremists, and putting lives at risk. He told UN News. So you got UN News using UN sources to justify censoring everybody on the planet. They don't need anybody else. They got themselves, so that's all is necessary. You're not allowed to debate anything. They're not going to tell you their assertions that is, you're not going to tell you what the law is. They just come out screaming and swinging at everybody. But hey, we're United Nations, so you better get ready because it's coming. We're bringing it. You can't do nothing about it. We got 195 militaries. So come on board or step up and let's get it on. Adding that there is a real danger of interference in climate negotiations. Oh, they won't get the $1.3 trillion they need to bully the rest of the planet with. Well, isn't that interesting? There's broad recognition, and I'm going to show you my assertions. I'm going to show you why radiation is climate change, not those 4 papers. You can call in, I'll give you the phone number over and over and over during this, but coming up. There is broad recognition that disinformation can affect and compromise every part of COP. Like calling themselves COPs is absurd. It's one of the most arrogant things imaginable. Now they're the cops of the world, of the Conference of Parties process. Process, diplomatic negotiations, the action agenda, mobilization summits, all our efforts will be at risk if we fail. Well, you already failed. You won't have a debate or a conversation. You won't debunk anybody. You won't allow any dissenting voices. They're forced to become more arrogant, more agitated, and more confrontational because you want to have a conversation. You won't even tell them what your science is. Chicken eggs. If we fail to tackle disinformation properly, which stems from denialism, well, that's the closest we got. And the whole story, which is the same story, which is denialism. Well, there's no climate change. That's their narrative. That's what they're worried about. They really didn't think that somebody was going to have that opinion on this friggin' planet. If one denies, there can be no future. Everybody has to come on board. If anybody's a single person on this planet is going to deny their narrative, they need to take over the whole planet right away. He flagged the role of algorithms, which they own. All the social media, they own it. All my videos at Conference of Parties have a big banner there. United Nations says, go there, not here. I don't have that. They're flopping around everywhere. Every time somebody says something that I disagree with, all of a sudden I got a big banner on my videos will go under theirs. Or he flagged the role of algorithms, amplifying conspiratorial and manipulative content. Yeah, well, what is it? Often using sophisticated tactics to spread false messages. Yeah, it's very slight. You got to know what you're talking about to figure it out. But it's there. It's subliminal. So if you don't agree 100% unequivocally with something that you don't know what it is, because they won't tell you what it is, why there's climate change. Well, no, the science is settled, Dana. We don't need to tell you. I think you do. I think the world deserves that much. And who are you to tell us anything in the first place? Amplifying conspiratorial, manipulative content using sophisticated tactics to spread false messages. Well, that sounds just like UN to me. That sounds like the nuclear industry to everybody. That's what the nuclear industry has been doing for 80 years. Here's Fukushima. Look, so officially nothing got out of that building. Yeah, there was a couple of grams of tritium in the water in the tanks at Fukushima. Nothing got out though. Nothing, not even less than a gram. Oh, nothing got it. But the official story is that never happened. The United Nations, UNSCLEAR, ERPA, the IPRC, the International Atomic Energy Agency will tell you that never happened. When you go to the International Atomic Energy Agency site and go back in their time machine and download that picture. Because guess what? It actually happened. His mandates, his mandate is now that they own the planet, they own the ocean, they own the oxygen, they own all the fresh water. Keep the issue in the public eye and mobilize political, religious, and social leaders, civil society, and the media to push back against any dissenting voices. Everybody has to attack anybody with a different opinion. Well, nothing's changed. But it sounds like they're panicking. It sounds like someone pissed their pants and he didn't want to stand up, so he started to sprout. Now we're going to have to start up. I'm not taking this shit anymore. Everybody call me a chicken neck. Mobilized political, religious. Man, they got a lot of tricks left in their little big bag of tricks, haven't they? Social leaders, influencers, people that look good on street corners, civil society. That's an interesting frame. And the media to push back. Well, I got no word about the media. The media will do whatever they want. Let's say aliens done it, and it's going to happen tomorrow morning. We're going to come out there and we're going to make sure the whole world knows. Issue in the public eye and mobilize political, religious, and social leaders, civil society, everybody against anybody that has denialism. They're a threat. Cracking the code behind the climate laws. What are the climate laws? What is the climate truth? You're gonna wait. Don't be stupid like me and read this whole freaking article, because this is a huge. We're still going. We're 38 minutes in. I'm not bringing in all the pretty pictures. We're just going right through it. Little tiny blips here and blips there. For the first time, information integrity has made it onto the official Conference of Parties agenda. 30 years of doing nothing. I guess this is what they're going to kick it off with after 30 years. They accomplished nothing in 30 years. Speaking of UN news, this is UN speaking of UN news. This is so stupid. Mr. Canella stressed that the global initiative aims to expose the machinery driving climate disinformation. The machinery. It's an epidemic, apparently. I can't find it out there anywhere. We still know very little about what's behind us, for example. Oh, you know, very little. Really? With your budget? What is it, $1 billion a year just for whatever you feel like? Who funds these posts? So the post has to be funded. Wow. And the reason they waited that far into the story to come out and mention that is because they knew that 99% of the people wouldn't make it that far. Anybody who made it that far was a player, was working with them, right? Who fund these posts. And why do they spread faster than other types of content? If we don't understand the mechanisms, so it has to be an agenda of whatever they're worried about, to design effective strategies to combat this phenomenon. The core of the global initiative is precisely to finance, especially in the global south, investigative journalism. I don't know if there's any of them left, is it? And research projects to uncover what's really happening. But meanwhile, we got to censor everybody on the freaking planet. Any dissenting voices. It's precisely, so it's a false flag. It's precisely the finance, especially in the finance, investigative journalism and research projects, The Global Fund for Information Integrity on Climate Change, created under the initiative, has attracted 447 proposals from 100 countries already. For information integrity on climate change, so that they're well funded right away, and they have all kinds of useful idiots screaming for their piece of the pie. Backed by initial $1 million from Brazil, the fund is supporting its first round of projects. Mr. Canella, now remember, there's 12 countries signed on to censoring people, on top of everything. Calls it very rewarding to see the issue embraced so strongly at Conference of Parties 30. Disinformation shape-shifting tactics. Maria Clara Morales, a UN-verified champion. A UN-verified champion. What the freak? Well, I'm Dr. Verified, so I should fit in maybe. And you can call in 709-740-4076. Well, you're supposed to be doing the show. Only this story has been haunting me the entire day. So she's got a platform, co-founder of Maria's Verdes platform, knows the battle well, with over 500,000 TikTok followers. So she feeds them 10, 15, 20-second videos all day, right? No dissenting voices allowed. She's a UN-verified champion. Did I mention that? Bonafide UN-verified champion. It's hilarious that their evidence is themselves. She says the fight against climate disinformation is completely possible, but also extremely challenging. Why would she be in charge? Why wouldn't you get somebody with a degree, right, to cook up a... Why would you have UN-verified champion? She just regurgitates everything we says, Dana. Perfect. She warns that these campaigners are highly organized and backed by powerful forces, particularly the fossil fuel. I'm not backed by anybody. Like, I'm sorry, I am. A couple of people support me, but I'm not backed by an industry. I'm not backed by big foundations or something like that. Unfortunately, because if you put me on a pedestal, I'll kill the nuclear industry in just a couple of years. Their narrative, she says, changed their disguise over time. So who gives a fuck what she said? She's a nobody. She got 500,000 followers on TikTok. You know how many people got 500,000 followers on TikTok? It's an absurd amount. You know how many of them are actually intelligent? Very freaking few. Do you think this weirdo right here, who a verified UN parrot? There are several types of disinformation. One of the most powerful is saying it's too late and there's nothing can be done. I can't believe he said that. Well, blow my fucking mind. That's what this is all about. Several types of disinformation. One of the most powerful is saying it's too late and there's nothing can be done. That's it. That's what the madness is all about. That's why 12 countries signed on. That's why you're going to recruit religious leaders, civil society, media to counter that. Or that these events like Conference of Parties don't make a difference. The crime of the century, you say. You really didn't think somebody was going to say that? To a bunch of weirdos? That cuts an 8-mile highway out into the Amazon forest to save the Amazon forest? And when the reality was so they wouldn't have to go anywhere near any of the cities or... You know, Brazil is a very impoverished country. And there's a lot of guns... There's a lot of dynamite. There's an absurd amount of kidnapping. There's ridiculous amount of pickpockets. That's why they went out in force. Like, these people down there are chicken necks. When, you know, I don't even know how to say it. It's not like they're going to go out at nighttime and go for a walk or something, first off, right? Even if they were in Rio de Janeiro or wherever, none of the people at conference or parties would have been out to the restaurants anywhere in Brazil. Right? These people, most of them are going to wear diapers, for goodness sakes. That's also disinformation. These events so that's disinformation, that's the big whoop. Now you're going to attack everybody, censor everybody worldwide because people said the obvious? Saying this isn't working, or it's slow, or it's complex, it's too frustrating? That's sophisticated disinformation. We must constantly reaffirm the value of multilateralism and the importance of spaces like this one. They were doing that to their Sally Ann, right? 500,000 TikTok followers. But if Elvis was alive now, he'd probably hire her, marry her probably. She got 500,000 TikTok followers. All the stars aligned, and all she does is regurgitate UN's narrative, a bona fide, certified useful idiot. A generation that refuses to give up. Despite the challenges, Mrs. Morales told us, the UN verified champion, here they are. These are weirdos, to say the least. I'm sure they're very nice people when they were young, but now that UN gave them a bit of attention, their mind have turned to mush. A UN verified champion. Oh yeah, we love UN, but we read it all the time growing up. I love UN. Did they have to, did they buy Cracker Jack boxes and get this little ring that says UN verified on it? And then they grow up and they're like, we're UN verified. I'm going to get my doctor to sign off on a TikTok channel. And I'm going to be UN lapdog for the rest of my life. A UN verified champion. None of this makes sense unless you understand who these people are at the United Nations and how disconnected they are from the rest of the planet. None of these people had a social life when they were growing up. None of these people probably even own jeans. None of these people probably even read a book. All of them could regurgitate whatever was in their class books. They got aced everything because they were able to regurgitate everything in university that was in the book, right? And there's so many examples of these types of people. But they get degree after degree because they're so dysfunctional. But they can get the education, they can memorize everything, they can play that game, and the reward is the teacher pets them on the head a few times once in a while. That's what it was all about, right? It's the true teacher's pet. A UN verified champion. Well, golly gee, wow. Despite the challenges, Ms. Morales told us she hopes in younger generations by producing content rooted in science and sustainability. She says awareness, and don't underestimate these people. This is cooked up by the smartest of the smartest at UN, okay? They got her on a pedestal. So everybody, they're such nice down-to-earth people. And they just regurgitate everything on the UN's website under memos each morning. She says awareness of the climate emergency is growing fast. According to her, climate change is real. I'll explain it to you. We're about to get into that. According to her, young people are a great source of hope and optimism, She urges everyone to play their part in creating micro-revolutions through everyday choices. And that supports climate and drives change. Dib, 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 dub, dub, dub. Wave of truth. Conference of Parties 30 targets disinformation threat to the climate action. Now, this is not the only story about that, by the way. But it's the first time in their history we've seen them where they're going to just censor everybody. And they're going to shield the journalists, the researchers, the academics from any dissenting voices. You read it, you've seen it, you heard it. I didn't Photoshop anything. Everything is certified, UN verified. All right, here comes crazy. That was just one story from the panics of UN. The ranks of UN have gone into full-fledged panic. All right, here we go. Almost there. Blah, blah, blah. Let's go. There we go. Okay, so back, just to remind everybody what UN is. UN climate change, the science is settled, is based on 4 papers. Now, I went and researched everything myself, and I found the father of global warming, Ray Wallace Brocker. I said, okay, that's one down, and now I got to find the rest of it. Then there was, there was Net Zero, Miles Allen. There's 2 of them out of 4 of them. That's what they're using to bludgeon humanity with. What about, who the freak came up, who wrote the paper on carbon footprint? I like to kick the shit out of whoever that was. That turns out to be, that's what I said way back in the day, right? That turned out to be, I was reading the story, I remember when I first read the story. The idea of a personal carbon footprint was popularized by a large advertising campaign of the fossil fuel company BP Oil. Remember the big oil spill? In 2000, I think it was late 2004, early 2005. Designed by blah, blah, blah. The campaign was intended to divert attention from the fossil fuel industries polluting all the birds and seals and puppies and everything on the coastlines with oil spills onto the individual consumers. It instructed people to calculate their personal footprint. So there's no science to it. If you consume something, that's your footprint. So therefore, you're the problem. Your tin cans, your pop bottles, your cardboard, you are the problem. Instructed people to calculate their personal footprints, provide ways for people to go on a low-carbon diet. Their strategy, also employed by major fossil fuel companies, borrowed heavily from previous campaigns by the tobacco industry and plastic industry. You know what was interesting about the tobacco industry was for 60 years, the mice never died of nicotine. And then one day they all died, every one of them, nicotine. There's garbage cans and garbage cans and garbage cans of mice. All the mice always died of the nicotine, but the actor in the lab coat on the TV screen said that was his favorite brand. Shift the negative consequences of those industries, underage smoking, cigarette butt pollutions, plastic pollutions, onto the individual choices. BP, by the way, made no attempt to reduce its own carbon footprint, expanding oil drilling everywhere. But the United Nations took that paper, the carbon footprint, you heard that endlessly, the global warming narrative, Wallace Brocker took that paper, took Miles Allen's paper, and Timbuktu, whack job, James Hansen. He's got the Pulitzer Prize from Taiwan, so to speak, where he's got $1 million for champion nuclear. Is best known for his research, climatology. Congressional testimony on climate change helped raise broad awareness of global warming. So climate change and global warming. And he was 99% sure when he worked at NASA that, this is not science, and it's not challenged. It's not peer-reviewed. His testimony was pivotal regardless and marked the official beginning of the global warming. So Global warming started with James Hansen, not the United Nations. Carbon footprint started with BP oil because they contaminated Alaska with oil spills, and they wanted to blame it to you. So your carbon footprint. So United Nations loved it and took that paper. They took Miles Allen's papers and gave him a cushy job at Cambridge. So he's now Professor Miles Allen, which is that's quite the insult when you come from my part of the world. And then Wallace Brocker, father of the hockey stick, global warming. So that's the 4 papers. That's the science. The science is settled. Those 4 papers settle science. That's the science. And you better not disagree with none of these whack jobs. And we're going to shield all the media so the media never hears this version. All right, let's keep going. So I think it's radioactive fallout. I've been thinking that for a long time, and I've been saying it, singing it, and praising it for a long time. And the reason is because it works like this. Can't believe we're about to start my version now. Air travel industry's emissions fall outside the scope of conference. Outside the scope. But they're going to tax us for everything. Carbon tax everybody. But the industry, the air travel, the military, the Navy, the Air Force, it falls outside too. Yeah. You know, certain industries like the nuclear, that falls outside. Clean energy, it falls outside. That's their official version. We still can't accurately predict the impact of carbon emissions on the global climate system in the coming century. Right, you should read that paper, by the way. Okay, so how does radiation play into this equation? Like carbon, wherever it lands, you got more, because what happens is all the insects will die every day naturally before the nuclear industry came along. Birds, mammals, and animals would die naturally, right? There was a cycling all summer long. There's insects only live for a few days, and they would fall down, get broken up by the fungus and the bacteria and the biota, the cycle of life, right? Same thing for the ocean, so to speak, right? Everything was recycled. Everything is carbon, right? Carbon. We have lightning strikes long before humans showed up, and that's why we have an atmosphere, is because of carbon. Hinkley Point nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. Sizewell C nuclear plant is surrounded by farms. These are 2 new plants they're going to build. And they're surrounded by farms as far as you can see. So the fuel pool will be hemorrhaging from there forever and ever and ever. Glasgow climate marchers to Conference of Parties 26 coalition, we are watching you. Apparently not. There are lots of cops down there. So Conference of Parties 30. Now, officially, International Atomic Energy Agency, IRPA, UNSCLEAR, United Nations, refused to acknowledge these reactors melted down. So this whale, for instance, didn't die because of lack of carbon. It didn't die for lack of carbon. It died from radiation, like all the whales. We'll get to that coming up. I'll make more sense of it for you. So this never happened officially, but unofficially, this is reactor 3 at Fukushima. That's reactor 4. So they lost a total of, each building was 9 reactor cores, and Chernobyl was a small reactor. It was a graphite reactor. It was a new reactor. Didn't have fuel pools at the top of the buildings. And they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom, 3,000 kilometers away. Not because of carbon, but because of radioactive fallout. And the reason he closed them is because the radioactive fallout is pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. And if people eat it, they eventually get sick from it. Autoimmune triggers, illnesses, diseases, and we'll get into that coming up. So all of a sudden, post-Fukushima, the word carbon-free. So Hinkley Point is carbon-free. Just to build that site, it's hard to wrap your mind around. It's the biggest construction site on the planet. but it's carbon-free. It's going to provide carbon-free power, and it's carbon-free. It's the biggest construction job on the planet. So the electricity bill just to power that every day is astronomical. To run it, when it gets up and running, each reactor is going to use 6,500 tons of water every day. So to put it in context, if you put a ton of water in the back of a pickup, 1-ton pickup truck, and you put them bumper to bumper, that's a row of traffic right around the entire planet, more than once, has to go through the reactor every 24 hours. So it takes an enormous amount of energy to move that much water in 24 hours, every 24 hours, but that's only for one of the reactors. There's going to be 6 here. So 6 rows of traffic right around the entire planet, 1-ton pickup trucks, with 1,000 liters on the back of each one of them, have to go into 6 reactors each day. So 40 million 1-ton pickup trucks, basically, have to go into the 6 reactors each day. So that's a lot of water. That's an absurd amount of water. So you need 2 dedicated gas, oil, and coal plants to make that happen. Think about that statement now. But nuclear is carbon-free. But to build it, you need dedicated gas, oil, and coal plants, at least 2 of them, for their entire lifespan. And then the most recent reactor going to decommission in the United Kingdom is going to take 95 years. Look it up at the BBC, right? Okay. YouTube responds to accusations of sneakily hiding restricted content in search results. YouTube will start using AI to guess your age. If it's wrong, you got to prove it. Now, the United Nations is going to do the same thing to everybody. YouTube addresses creators' concerns that it's secretly using AI to edit some videos. And YouTube's AI editing scandal reveals how reality can be manipulated without our consent. I was looking at the next one. So censorship is very, very real, and now they can do it with AI. And so obviously the United Nations is planning on doing this. This is the A10 Warthog. There's other names, but the boys like to call her the Warthog. And what they're loading is dirty bombs. Every one of them is a dirty bomb. They're not coated, not tipped. They're just uranium they're what they call depleted uranium. It's contaminated with plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and endless amount of isotopes. But it's left over, it's gone through a chain reaction. But even though it's low-level radiation per se, the majority of it, because there's so much of a volume. So during the Gulf War, the Americans used around, and their coalitions used around 700 tons of these dirty bombs on the highway of death out of Baghdad. Remember the Ba'ath Party from Iraq went in and looted Kuwait. And they took the Rolls Royces and all the luxury cars, filled them up with paintings and jewelry shop loot and everything else, and cash from the banks. And they're driving out of there, and the A-10 Warthogs came in and just sprayed them with depleted uranium munitions, which is it's supposed to be used for rare incidences of hardened structures where their boys are under siege and they can't defend themselves. These guys are supposed to show up and take out the hardened bunkers, but they use it on everything. They used 700 tons in just a few days, and a Japanese professor at Hamburg conference done the equation, the mathematical equation of the animosity equivalent of 44,000 Nagasaki bombs of low-level radioactive fallout that will last for millions of years. So that was equal to 44,000 Nagasaki bombs just in that one place of so-called. But see, low-level radiation is very deceptive. So just to set a base for everything, if you get an anthropogenic man-made atom, and you put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it, if you take a man-made atom in your body, sequesters in your muscles, your organs, your bones, your body has this foreign object. It's not from the solar system, so it doesn't know what it is, so it attacks it with white blood cells. But this foreign object, anthropogenic man-made atom, has a couple of unique properties. Like cesium-137 will pulse energy 600 feet. So imagine this is inside your child's body, your grandparents, yours, or animals in the forest, or species in the oceans, whatever the case may be. So it pulses energy at the speed of light in every direction. That's known as a Beck roll. That Beck roll is slamming and wrecking and shearing DNA, chromosomes, cells, molecules, and everything else. So your body has two things going on. It has a single atom in your body. Now it's got a lot more than that because of the nuclear industry's 80 years of releases. Now it's got a pulse every second, and everything we created for 80 years is out there pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. And you have no concept, and I'm going to try to explain it to you, of how much we've created and how much is in the environment doing something like that. I'm just going to give you like a maddening amount of information coming up here to quantify my assertions. Okay, so a single atom, you put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, it's in your body, it's exploding every second for the rest of your life. It's low level, but it's still exploding every second inside your body for the rest of your life. It's low level compared to some nasty stuff they got. But your body doesn't have an autoimmune trigger to defend against anthropogenic man-made radiation, even the atoms, particularly the atoms. So they attack, your white blood cells will try to fix all the damage every second and attack the source perpetually every second for the rest of your life. It can't keep up with either one of them. Eventually it'll build a sarcophagus around the atom. That's the best you can hope for. It's a foreign object. It's pulsing energy every second. It's wrecking chromosomes, DNA, cells throughout your body every second. And you're bioaccumulating this stuff as you drink, as you eat, as you breathe. So this was an interesting one. Now, this is just one story of depleted uranium. This is just one story. There's an absurd amount of these stories out there. Study the question of disposal of 35.7 million ammunitions, dirty bombs. These are dirty bombs. If I take it and put a conventional explosive around it and blow it up as a dirty bomb, if they shoot it into your community, well, they got to do it. They had Rolls Royces. Ammunition with a core of depleted uranium. It's not depleted. It's not depleted for millions or hundreds of millions of years. It's called that to trick and manipulate and deceive you and coerce you into being complacent. In addition to aviation munitions, the United States planned to hold utilization of armored-piercing tank shell calibers 105 and 120 millimeters. The Abrams tanks are using 155 millimeter depleted uranium round. They have a kill ratio of 900 feet when they explode, and they shower everything with dulram. It used to be called dulram, not depleted uranium. Depleted uranium, low-level radioactive material. Somehow or another, they got rid of most of that acronym, and they're only left with depleted uranium. That sounds a lot better to the person who's not in the loop. So they want to get rid of 35 million rounds because you have 35 new million rounds to replace it with. McAllister, Oklahoma, munition factory. It's got 1,000 facilities there. They only make dirty bombs for the military-industrial complex machine. And Zelensky, for a long time, was getting the 155 millimeter depleted uranium rounds. And now Israel got them, right? Because that's how it works. So Fukushima is a pretty close approximation of the China syndrome. The melted fuel cores, I'll show you this in a second, burned through the containment vessels, materials below their structure, mixing with groundwater. Well, it didn't. Let me play a second of this.
My understanding is on top.
So this is media claiming that they're at the top of a reactor 4T lift. So it lost its entire inventory. Officially, none of that happened. Officially, it got everything out of the building according to the media. The same media United Nations now is going to use to call you whatever they feel like it. They have no problem lying for United Nations, IRPA, UNSCLEAR, the IPRC, International Atomic Energy Agency, and saying that they're on top of a building that don't exist. They don't want to be blamed for killing the ocean, by the way. Essentially, Fukushima is a machine that's washing radioactivity into the ocean. Yes, it is. It ejected its reactor cores in some of these buildings immediately, lost the entire inventories. Cesium remains dispersed throughout the water column from the surface to the ocean floor. Now, it can't be cesium. Wherever there's cesium, by the way, 137, there's 100 times more strontium-90 in the production ratio. Fukushima radiation still circling the globe. Levels consistently rise and fall in a 40-day cycle. I'm way down there, right? Okay. That doesn't do it justice. This is the French government base of a spike. This is a spike of cesium-137 at 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. 45% of the kids in Fukushima survey have thyroid exposures up to 50 millisieverts, 50,000 microsieverts for 1-year-olds. These are catastrophic numbers. Hospital worker says 5 out of 7 babies were born with birth defects, Down syndrome, or lost by miscarriage. So the rest of the planet got brutalized too, right? The storms we're seeing are post-Fukushima. Almost all typhoons, cyclones, and hurricanes are supercells. Winds that we don't have infrastructure, building permits to protect against, because we've never had that before. Well, the nuclear industry, if you look at all of these events throughout the abnormalities, these were during the heavy nuclear testing, where they had a nuclear war on your planet. 23 days of radioactive fallout right there. Now, that was for reactor 3. It ejected, I'll show you a video coming up, ejected the reactor core right out of the building. Japan's crew facing a 100-year battle at Fukushima. So you got to get the media out there telling everybody it's like a banana and a potato chip walking in sunshine. And the media is more than happy. They're growing the food in the nuclear wasteland right alongside the 1-ton bags, the 30 million 1-ton bags, and shipping it to your country. And the repercussions for that, eating that food, is catastrophic. That's why you'll see them, if you go back through all the media, they'll talk about bananas and potato chips and walking in sunshine and climbing mountains and sleeping next to somebody. Now, United Nations, here's what Eisenhower said about United Nations. In the Council of Government, I'm not going to read everything, in the Council of Government, we must guard against acquisitions of unwarranted influences, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The United Nations has 195 militaries. And if you look at what they've done in North Korea and called it a police action, millions dead, millions missing, millions in refugee camps, millions unaccounted for, millions of orphans, and they lost the war. They were beaten. At the end of it, they got beaten out of there with sticks. Okay, so there's two parts of this here. So this is what Eisenhower said. He called it the military-industrial complex. He was talking about United Nations. Here's what George Bush said, Senior, about United Nations. I'll adjust the volume, hopefully.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The promise and the vision of the UN founders, which was League of Nations, right? So he just called United Nations over and over the New World Order. Eisenhower called them the military-industrial complex. So the United Nations version is you got carbon is the problem, and the disinformation, nobody's really sure what it is because they won't be clear on it. Despite that's the idea of the conference, is to have that conversation, which they're not going to have. Washed up orca on Belgium beach. This orca is not emaciated because there's a lack of food. There's still lots of food out there. It eats 240 species. It can find something to eat. There's still seals out there, blah, blah, blah. Octopus, halibut. it's emaciated like all the other whales that we cover, and we have a big playlist, 52 videos in my playlist of recent die-offs of emaciated animals. It's unbelievable. And it's emaciated because it bioaccumulated so much radiation from after Fukushima's pulse event into the ocean that it can't uptake nutrition no more. It has leukemia, basically. But hey, atoms for humanity. There it is right there, atoms for humanity. Surrounded by farms, so all the fuel pools, which were at the top of the buildings, the typical nuclear plant is surrounded by farms. We'll get to that coming up. So this is the no exclusion zone, when the reality is you're going to see the whole planet is a difficult to return zone. So this is supposed to be the only radiation from Fukushima. But the official story now, which changed in 2023, is that nothing got out of these buildings. So this is pre-United Nations, Taiwan, South Korea, China, and Japan conspiring to manipulate the 6 billion Asians, started in 2023. So officially, think about this building, officially out of that building, according to a professor of nuclear quantum engineering at CAS, which is South Korea's most prestigious governmental institution, he's a professor at the Department of Nuclear Quantum Engineering. He says all the 1,000 tanks at the plant is 2.2 grams of tritium. Nothing got out of these buildings. And that it was equal to 3 grams of sugar. Whatever got out of these buildings was equal to 3 grams of sugar going into the ocean. So he's the guy they got a shield, apparently, because he lives in his own little world. The ELP system for Fukushima in 2013, when they were just starting to build it. These were handout pictures. In 2014, in August, they were hoping to have it running by the end of the year, which would be 2015.
Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle.
Sorry about that. I forgot that was a video. So this was a story from the BBC. I'm going to turn it down for you. I'll come back up on the volume. This is the BBC in 2013 saying the 1,000 tanks were full from radioactive, highly radioactive water pumped up from aquifers underneath these reactors that are destroyed.
Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer.
Now, this is 2013. TEPCO, it'll be here, and they'll say have no control over the water all the way up from then. We still have no control. Nothing. So everything has been running out into the ocean, and the tanks were all filled from the aquifers. I'll be right back after that.
Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tonnes of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
So he talks about the large tanks, and then just before that they showed you these tanks. These are tiny tanks. So they filled all the tanks up from the aquifer under the site in 2013. Like this picture here shows you there's no reactor lift. This is built off-site, then assembled there by remote-controlled crane through gravity. So when you look at the buildings, every nuclear scientist knew reactor 3 minimum inventories, 9 reactor cores, and the same thing for building 4 were gone. So we got all kinds of pictures of the tanks. We counted 750, and that's being generous with the small tanks. Everything is going straight into the ocean. The reason that's true is because if you pump the highly radioactive water, which is fuel particulates, into the tanks, it settles on the bottom. You get gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, right? And you're going to have a chain reaction, a criticality event at the bottom of the tanks. That's been known to happen at other places, like the Mayak, for instance, on the Techa River. And you'll lose that entire inventory. Now, the numbers that they're floating around are 2.2 sieverts per liter of just beta. That's just some of the low numbers. Which means the tanks, the big tanks, 300,000 gallon tanks, would have 1.4 million sieverts of beta. Which means you couldn't, going to pretend neutrons and alphas and gammas don't exist. Even then, you can't build another tank alongside of it. And you can't dismantle those tanks because they're going to be incredibly radioactive, which is what they're allegedly doing right now, right? Now, they have a lot of earthquakes. They're built onto tectonic plates, 70 miles from the tectonic plates. That's the equivalent of being built on the tectonic plates. A few years ago, they had a big earthquake close by, and about 100 of these tanks shifted because they were empty. So they smartened up and filled them up with fresh water. But the reality of it is you can't put something in a tank that was ejected out of the buildings right away. Right, the plume covered the entire planet on top of that. And the reason is fuel particulates. So there's 9 reactor cores blowing up. One of them is a little plutonium mixed oxide reactor core. The typical emissions from a fuel pool are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So the plume, the emissions in the plume, each atom is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Each atom, when it's in your body, is giving you a dose of more than 1 trillion of what it would give you on the outside, which is brutal. Like cesium-137 will pulse for just an atom for 600 feet in every direction, 1,200 feet. The plume is going to be saturated with all the isotopes. So they have a plumes for all different isotopes. And the reason is you study one isotope and the quantities were so huge, so abnormal. The Great Lakes, of course, they're attacking the freshwater worldwide through the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes are surrounded by nuclear plants and nuclear fuel sites, reprocessing sites, holding sites, and fuel processing sites, and nuclear power plants and fuel pools are all hemorrhaging. The fuel pools, this is on day 15th, you got 4 reactors in a row melted down, and at the top of each of the buildings were 8 reactor cores. So 36 reactor cores. These reactor cores are pure uranium, pure plutonium. Chernobyl was graphite. It was a small reactor. It was a new reactor. It didn't have spent fuel pools at the top of the buildings. These had 30 years of inventories gone through them. And so they had at least 8 reactor cores in the fuel pools at the top of the buildings, like all of these particular designs, because they don't have a repository anywhere on the planet. Now, mind you, once one goes down, you can't get near the other ones. And even if the water's not circulating, the fuel can dissolve and lose a large portion of its radioactive inventories. Once it goes through a chain reaction, the fuel is splitting atoms. But what that means, though, if I take that fuel and I hit it with a sledgehammer, if I take like a gram of it and I put it on an anvil and I hit it with a remote-controlled pneumatic hammer, and I atomize an aerosol and release it into the environment. Each of those particulates are splitting atoms. So when the reason the plume spreads out, right, and looks like you see how the plume is coming out of there, but it's growing bigger. It's replicating itself. It's splitting atoms. Right? It's a plume that replicates. It's the only perpetual machine on the planet. Is radiation. So radiation fallout, certain scenarios have that same application. And during a nuclear meltdown, you're gonna atomize an aerosol, ionize and radiate all the material too. The rebar, the steel, the cement, the water, everything gets ionized and radiated and turned into an awful, enormous temperatures, into awful isotopes that will harm and destroy all kinds of species. But what happens is with the big plumes is they spread out. Now they're not just dispersing, they're replicating. And so the plumes at the bottom of it is a continuous plume covering the entire planet. It's a continuous plume, and it's still hemorrhaging out of the sites today, almost 15 years later. So the scientists in the 50s described it as a biological weapon, because when it's in your body, the damage it was doing every second, whether it was an animal or a bird or insect or anything else. So the fuel, because we're talking about so much inventory, so each reactor core was equal to 100 Chernobyls. I'll just come right back to this in 1 second. The wrong one. So at Chernobyl, all 600 helicopter pilots died. Oh, here we go. So this was Russia. TV came out, and the reason they made this particular statement, because they were talking about the inventories and the amount of uranium, plutonium versus
the fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl, and in fact the two power plants in the Fukushima region produce the world's biggest joint amount of energy, and this means of course that this reactor, which is under threat now, is far more powerful than the one in the fourth block of the Chernobyl nuclear power station, which exploded 25 years ago.
So Chernobyl's reactors were interesting because they were graphite, but Fukushima reactors are pure uranium, pure plutonium. It's a totally different concoction, much more powerful. So and there was 9 reactor cores at the top of each building. So 36 reactor cores were lost. Each reactor core, because of there's so much bigger reactor cores, and each reactor core pure uranium, pure plutonium, whereas Chernobyl was a graphite. It was still brutal. But we're talking about the animosity equivalent of 3,000, 4,000 reactor cores like Chernobyl melting down of the inventories lost. And so you can't put that into tanks when it's already gone. That was a distraction for you. Okay, so this was NOAA, North American government study of cesium-137 by the end of March the 11th. So by the end of March the 11th, 2013, I don't know. It was actually supposed to be here somewhere. So they're downplaying, but what they're showing is how it spreads. So what happens is it wipes out the vulnerable species. Now, because this stuff is assimilated into all of our trees and plants, and forests, we have a continuous plume over the planet. It's in all the water, fresh and salt water. They're attacking the freshwater worldwide. Everything from Fukushima is hemorrhaged directly into the ocean. You can't contain it. You can't contain fuel particles. You can't filter fuel particulates. Japanese are not doing that. It was actually over 1 million. It was 192 species of birds, migratory birds, insect eaters, that showed up in different parts of the country severely emaciated. They're extremely emaciated. They have no fat reserves and no muscle mass. They've been flying until they dropped. 192 species of insect eaters, and they couldn't find any food. They couldn't find the insects. So this is just one of the many weird things post-Fukushima. This was 2020. Now, they didn't die per se because of the ocean, per se, right? So let me explain how this... So the whales, most of the whales are dependent upon the phytoplankton, the zooplankton. So this year, gray whale die-off fear, the starving whales migrate north. So 14,000 out of 27,000 pre-Fukushima gray whales have died post-Fukushima. The remaining 13,000 had no surviving babies last year on the 12,000 southerly migratory run. Now this year are in such poor shape, there's severe emaciation. They're already in poor shape / emaciated. The whales we're seeing are extremely emaciated. So some of the whales are not going to be healthy and some of them are emaciated. They're either all emaciated or all healthy. They have bulging ribs with shoulder blades and vertebrae visible from the shore. It means they haven't had nothing to eat for over a year. So like the birds, right? The over 1 million of these, extremely emaciated. There was no fat reserves and barely any muscle mass. And they fly until they drop. Now, a similar story that was the common murres and the Cassini auklets in Vancouver to Alaska. It was 1.4 million, or 1 million of the common murres. Now, they dive 600 feet all day as a hobby. And they eat anchovies and squid and sardines and krill, etc., because the food chain is broken post-Fukushima. They couldn't find their food. Now, they're the deepest divers. They dive 600 feet all day. The Cassini auklets, 1.4 million of them over 2 years, they all showed up severe emaciation, by the way. The Cassini auklets eat microscopic animals. They eat the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, the little tiny pods. They showed up emaciated in the same types of severity at the same time. So you had two different spectrums of the food chain showing up at the same place at the same time in over 1 million of each species in the migratory run. Okay. In 2022, we had a mass die-off on the east coast of Canada. 600 miles of the coastline confirmed die-off of emaciated common murres, who dive 600 feet all day and feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill, etc., and what's known as dovekites, which eat microscopic animals. So we don't know how many died, but I was stalked by Japanese people. One of them actually there was a bridge, and this truck had passed me. I had pulled over this truck, had turned. When I was coming by, there was 2 Japanese guys in a truck on the side of the road intersection. And then they slowly came up behind me, and they slowly came behind me. And so when I got over a big hill in a turn, I pulled over on a nice shoulder and to let them go. And it took them forever to catch me. So I had a good look at the passenger. It looked like 2 Asians anyway. It looked Japanese to me, not that I'm an expert. So about 20 minutes later, when I get out to the highway and make a turn, there's a big bridge with a big siding. As I was going past this Japanese guy jumps over the guardrail with this aha moment, trying to intimidate me, I guess. It was, I camped out in a snowstorm and in freezing rain and in heavy winds to try to get the story. Every community I went into, the birds were showing up emaciated. The locals described it as emaciated. But they were actually stalking me that time. That was really interesting. But here we were. We had the exact same replication. I covered around 400 miles of coastline. And I went into all the post office, all the gas stations, all the small convenience shops in these little towns. And I asked them where they finding dead birds. So I was able to find out where it started and go for almost 400 kilometers. And they all told me the same story. They were showing up everywhere up in freshwater. These were seabirds that never ever go to freshwater. They were showing up in people's gardens. They've never seen nothing like it. And they were dying. They were starving to death. And they were coming in with the forestry and fisheries and everybody each day when they would post it on Facebook or wherever. The government would show up and pick up the dead birds. And they had to do it every single day because dead birds were showing up for days and days and days. And it made it into the news, right? So you had the same thing on the west coast as on the east coast, where you had species that dive deep all day, 600 feet, the common murres. And then you had a species in equal amounts of migratory runs that shouldn't even be there in that area because they're supposed to be under migratory run. That were eating microscopic animals in the ocean. The storm petros, we have the biggest colony of those here also. 6.6 million breeding pairs on Baccaloo Island, which is 60 miles away from here or something. And when 2019, 2020, 2021, I was out there 3 to 4 times each summer because you had 3.3 million breeding pairs. I couldn't find them. Now, they're nocturnal, so I get there late at night. And I have a decent boat, and I have spotlights and everything else, and radars. So I was out there, and I didn't find any. I didn't find any dead ones. I found some gannets on the outside, but I didn't find, surprisingly, and then it came out that they didn't show up. Well, they've been breeding there for millions of generations. It's bred into them, right? So if they don't show up, they're not going to go somewhere else. They're gone. But they're part of the 46 million migratory birds here that have disappeared, that for millions of years have come here to raise their fledglings. So they spend a few months having eggs and raising their fledglings and then getting on a migratory trip. So there's usually like 200 million of them will leave here, seabirds. The biggest migratory seabird run on the entire planet. They're missing. The spiders are also missing in the forest. And the theory I have on that is that the forest, we know, sucks up radiation, as you see coming up. And so they're sensitive to it. They can't raise the babies there because it's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. So the gray whales are severe emaciation. Fukushima worst case scenario, beyond 250 kilometers could be evacuation zone. So if your power plant, now they didn't evacuate the 250 kilometer zone because they said that didn't happen. But if that did happen, they would have evacuated 250 kilometers of the coastline. Now the land. Now the food was banned by 55 countries in those exact same 14 prefectures for a decade because it really did happen. But officially, the official story is that never happened. They got all the fuel out of the building. It's the official story. Worst case scenario map shows Japan cut in half by forced evacuation if that happened. So if that happened, they have to cut Japan in half. So they just covered it up.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake.
You think she's right there?
2011, leading to the country.
Does anybody believe she's on top of that building to your left, right? And this is what they said it looked like, but that's what it actually looked like. They put a cover over it. Don't physically touch it because obviously it would fall apart. I put together a little video a long time ago, Patrick Clausen at the Washington Institute. And he was talking about how do we get the war with Iran. So he's speaking to like-minded people, but they published it on their YouTube channel. And he's going to talk about how the Americans got into most wars throughout history. Short video.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war.
So what does he mean by that? It'd be best if somebody else started the war. If the truth is admitted about Fukushima, it would have broken the backbone of Japan's economy. United Nations is planning on quadrupling or tripling the nuclear capacity worldwide. It's a terrible idea, but in many ways more than people comprehend. Dr. Sternglass, was the first scientist to put a number on U.S. nuclear deaths from the nuclear bomb testing's radioactive fallout. He reported U.S. infant mortality had plunged steadily throughout the 20th century, but essentially unchanged in the 50s, early 60s, and there was roughly 375,000 excess deaths. The cause? A Pittsburgh School of Medicine professor, Dr. Ernest Sternglass, a physicist, theorized that the stagnation in infants' death progress was the result of atomic bomb test fallout. 375,000 excess deaths. So plutonium radioactive fallout, 144 dogs. Tumors of lung, skeletal, and liver occurred beginning 3 years after the exposures. Bone tumors and the skeleton tumors, 93 dogs, were the most common cause of death. And they make the assertion that they get 3 tumors from the plutonium. Not 3 bananas, but 3 tumors. The findings in the dogs suggest, and all the dogs died, right, of tumors. These findings in dogs suggest similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans. This is the USS Navy, the Raymond Gilmedy and Loveless Respiratory Research Institute. But the human kidney is 50 times less efficient than the animal kidney at filtering anthropogenic man-made radiation. So you're 50 times more likely to die than the dogs were, and all the dogs died vicious tumors. But the curium isotopes are the major byproducts in the radioactive nuclear fuel rods. So forget the alphas, forget all of that. It's the major, and it's not being used. But the fuel is splitting atoms all the time, releasing curium into the environment. Curium is never going to go away. So the fuel is splitting atoms up to fuel pools. The fuel pools are vented directly into the local environment, which is always farmland, except for a few. So the older reactor, the more fuel you have, the more atoms are released every day into the environment. And the numbers we're talking about are catastrophic. So each reactor core boils water for 1 million homes and businesses by splitting atoms. It's in a containment though, right? Once you take it out of the containment, it's gone through the chain reaction, it continues splitting the atoms. Those atoms are released. Those atoms are released into the local farmland, which they're all surrounded by. So between each one of these, I'm going to show you a study about why that's a stupid idea to be surrounded by farms, unless you're trying to poison everybody on the planet at the supermarkets. Experimentally, now think about the plumes that are coming out of there every day. They're the same plumes that will make a plume right around the planet. In about 30 days, you have a continuous plume right around the planet, and it never stops releasing those plumes out of the planet. And every year, you're putting more fuel into the pool, which is more releases. And what we're talking about is about 120,000 liters a day out of each fuel pool, because the fuel pools are boiling water because you're splitting so many atoms, but you're not under the pressure you were before that and at the enormous temperatures. But that doesn't mean not producing the same atoms, it's just more concentrated. So every liter of water is a catastrophic amount of radiation that boils up through the tall skinny stacks and is released into the environment. all of these atoms will never stop splitting, never stop pulsing energy at the speed of light. We've been producing it more and more every year for 80 years. And it's not contained. So this is global warming. So every fuel pool is surrounded by farms, so you're global warming too, because you have all this radiation in your bodies from the food that you ate at the supermarket. That these plants were built specifically in farmland so they can poison you too. And if they incinerate you, all that radiation is released to go poison somebody else because you can't destroy it by incineration. Foliage and root uptakes of cesium, strontium, zirconium. So they know that this is a terrible idea. So why would they do it? Because you would have a huge amount of radiation locally in just a few years. Imagine 10 years, imagine 20 years, imagine 30 years if you didn't have farms moving the radiation out of the local area. Accumulation of radionuclides by plants is a monitoring system. They got millions of studies like that. So why are nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? And they know everything about man-made radioactive fallout. They studied every species, all 8 million species have been studied by the chicken eggs. So it never stops snowing. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it or feel it or taste it. But it's assimilated in all your plants and all your trees and all your rice and all your food, all your vegetables, and it's time to deal with it. It's never too late to deal with it. So they know everything about radiation fallout. They studied every facet of it because it shows up everywhere. And it's pulsing energy so they can find it. Almost at the speed of light. It's a perpetual machine. Every isotope, every atom is a perpetual machine. And because nothing on the planet has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it, you end up with heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. The first studies after nuclear meltdown is Down syndrome, autism for newborns. How come? Because that's what it does. Why? So if it does that, then why are you growing it in farmland? So everybody who eats it is going to be bioaccumulating it constantly. And so it's a slow kill over decades, but it's guaranteed to take you out one way or another. And you're going to be prescribed a certain drug. They're going to give you more radiation to cure you. We'll talk about that. So that's the most frightening thing I can even perceive. And I'm the only person on the planet that's going to have that conversation. So all I got to do is silence me. Applications of ionizing radiation, they know everything about it. So why are they growing? Why is nuclear power plants in prime farmland and waterways? Because you got to realize that water is going to be feeding thousands of farms downstream. And they're hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools and everywhere else. They're legally have incinerators and dumping into the water or to the oceans. And every glass of water out of the ocean was 1 billion creatures. So a nuclear power plant is using 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks of water a minute. That's 6,450,000 one-ton pickup trucks of water every day, 1,440 minutes in a day, 4,500 one-ton pickup, 1,100 liters. It's 1 million gallons a minute. It's 4,500 tons. 6,450,000 tons of water each day through each reactor core. And now when you take the reactor out and put it in the fuel pool, you're still splitting the same atoms. And those atoms are no containment. They're boiled off each day into the environment where now they end up in food. But this atom doesn't just fall here. This covers the entire planet. That's the sickness and the madness of the nuclear industry. Now, there's another issue with radioactive fallout that people are unaware. When it comes to nuclear accident, there's a phenomenon known as sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. They do this in the 60s and the 50s in ocean testing. The high temperatures will liberate the sulfur from the seawater. The sulfur creates these so-called spherical ball shapes, which are able to absorb uranium, plutonium, americium, curium isotopes, for instance. And they become super hot particles, very mobile, able to travel long distances, not soluble in water, and they're liberated back into the air again. So they look to hover above the ground, where children and insects and birds and mammals and animals. And so you're talking about all your forests and meadows are getting full body X-rays amongst the endless amounts of neutrons, betas, alphas, and gammas, perpetually released from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. These are the nuclear reprocessing facility in Japan, or United Kingdom, Sellafield. It used to be called Windscale. And they had a plutonium mixed oxide breeder reactor meltdown. There's 8 million liters a day hemorrhaging into the Atlantic Ocean since 1959. It's surrounded by farms. If you get in a satellite picture, we've got a satellite picture coming up, you'll appreciate what I'm saying. But knowing that all they know about radiation fallout, you would imagine there'd be zero possibility they would put a nuclear plant within 1,000 miles of a farm. Because the evidence is unassailable that this is a big mistake. You're going to poison everybody. So the only thing that makes sense is this is an agenda. It's 100% on purpose. It's not an accident or a coincidence. Decontamination of a pesticide residue in food by ionizing radiation. So suggesting that ionizing radiation can decontaminate pesticides residue by radiating your food. These are crazy people. These people are actually insane. You kill all the nutrition left in the food with the radiation and give it to your children. GMO, you get more nutrition by licking a stamp than you do eating a corn on the cob. They engineered all the carbon, all the iron, all the calcium, all the magnesium out of the corn. So why would you build your nuclear power plants when you know they're going to suck up the radiation in the food and the farms around it, rather? And you know everything about radiation. There's nothing they don't know. They're geniuses who don't like us or anybody else on the planet. See, radiation is not just going to attack humans, it's going to attack every species, and it already has. And they don't have a right to do that to our planet. They don't have a right to do it to our small land mass. They don't have a right to do it to the 8 million species. And they're doing it by deceit and dishonesty and deception and and propaganda, like SpongeBob for the children, and then Simpsons, and then the Hulk, and then Spider-Man, promoting nuclear waste as something cool, something trendy, when they know that it has no redeeming qualities and there's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. And the problem is, it's in your body, the birds, the insects, the mammals, animals, whales, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second, forever and ever and ever, long past your experience on the planet, and your loved ones and your friends and your communities. So why would you put all your nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? Over 400 nuclear plants worldwide surrounded by farms. But all the fuel cyclings are surrounded by farms. All the dumps are surrounded by farms. You can't contain the emissions. That tall, skinny stack is hemorrhaging the fuel pools. If you could actually see the radioactive fallout, you wouldn't be able to see the site. There's that much coming out of there all day, every day, and never stops pulsing energy. And it goes in your food, and everything that eats that food, including humans, is producing this energy. You're heating up the planet. Now, what happens is, because the ground is fertilized, right? The farmers' fields, they're using fertilizer. They have water. They have this. They have that. And so they can grow food in that environment, right? But what happens in your forests and your meadows is the radioactive fallout sterilizes the bacteria, the fungus, the insects, the biota that breaks down the foliage and the litter. And so now the ground doesn't have water, able to retain water anymore, because it doesn't have the biota, doesn't have the fungus for the roots, the bacteria for the roots. That whole thing helped, 1 million creatures, microscopic creatures in the biota, and the fungus and the bacteria is what breaks down the cycle of life and recycles it back into the environment. Carbon, right? That was wiped out for the most part. That got a pulse event after Fukushima that never went away. So all the species were getting full body X-rays from the gamma shines, the neutron bombardments, the alphas, the betas, And they all pulse energy at the speed of light. So when they hit each other, they don't mingle. They bounce off each other. But they're doing it at the speed, almost at the speed of light. It's almost the speed of light, almost the speed of light. They hit each other, almost the speed of light. But there's this, when they hit each other, they create an X-ray. Right? The Germans call it, I think it is the Bremsstrahlung effect. But it's a braking effect. Almost at the speed of light, you're braking, and then you're picking up speed immediately again. Because you're producing so much of it, of each of the different genres, the gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas. They don't mingle. They reflect off each other. They slam into each other. So that sterilizes all the biota. And it kills the stability of the fungus and the ability of the ground to soak up water. So the ground is soaking up heat. Because after 80 years of the emissions, you had Fukushima was a pulse event at around 70, right? And that pulse event, so much radiation of very high caliber, and particulates that were atomized in aerosol, and they became, each of those particulates were splitting atoms. That's why a plume looks the way it does. It's because it's replicating itself. And it gets assimilated and everything. But it's out there, assimilated in everything now. Every branch, every leaf, every petal of every flower. All the pollen, of course, is radioactive going back to the hive, and so the hive fails after a few generations. You can't reproduce because of all the X-rays and everything else. The neutron bombardment, the gamma shines, the alpha rays. And estimated the half-life periods of cesium, well, you can't just include cesium. And so the animals are showing up emaciated for quite a few years. I'm not sure if there's anything else. I forgot there was that. I know we've done a bunch of these where I had other animals in the background just... And we're seeing whales washing up and there's no predators feeding on them. Your biggest enemy now is eating food from the farms worldwide, surrounded by and sanctioned by United Nations. They sanction all of this. Oh yeah, build it right there. We'll get you some farmland. So there wasn't a nuclear scientist, nuclear academic, a nuclear student, a nuclear professor on the entire planet didn't know the reactor cores and the fuel pools, 9 of them were gone at a reactor 3 on that picture on March the 17th. Right, they have irreversible heart disease for children. I can't even remember now. Heart damage for children with 50 atoms a kilogram. A Becquerel is a pulse of energy, but you need an atom to make the pulse of energy. So that was reactor 4, that was reactor 3, for instance. But as soon as you look at this building, if you're an academic, you know the inventories were gone. So there was an interesting statement made on March the 16th, day 5 of Fukushima, from Professor Frank von Hippel, I think it was his name. He suggested at least 8 reactor cores at the top of reactor 4. Well, it would be similar for each of the reactors.
And if, in terms of what we know about the capacity, about how many fuel rods would likely be inside that reactor, what sort of quantity are we talking about radioactivity?
I've heard different numbers ranging from 2 to 15 reactor cores worth. No, 2 to about 8 reactor cores worth.
So if it can't be controlled, that's worst case scenario, 8 reactors worth of radioactivity.
Right.
And
it's
a
long radioactivity. By the way, the fact that this has happened at unit number 4 is understandable, and it's consistent with the theory that it really did dry out, because the fuel from the unit number 4 was most recently discharged, and therefore was the hottest.
Reactor 3 was running. It was the hottest. And reactor 1 and 2. But see, there was no nuclear scientist looked at that. So 8 reactor cores. It was actually 9 counting the reactor core. 9 reactor cores. And 9 in number 2 and 9 in number 1. So when you look at reactor 4 2 years later, it's not hard to imagine now the fuel pools reactor cores, which were at the top of the buildings, are gone. And where did they go, you might ask? Well, there was 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. So not everybody got health care, not everybody was diagnosed. Should United Nations Conference of Parties 30 prove, not censor people, that carbon, not 80 years of radioactive fallout is global warming? Now, I at the beginning of this show, I told you and showed you their assertions. They won't tell it to you. They won't show it to you. I got it and I showed it to you. You probably won't find it anywhere else either in that capacity, right? Which is frightening. It wasn't just cancer, right? That's cause. There's heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary. So thyroid, and every species, every human now is producing radioactive stem cells and anthropogenic man-made radioactive hormones, which your body is not designed to do. And for developing, for children, that's going to turn out really bad. And they never stopped growing food in nuclear wasteland and harvesting it and shipping it worldwide. I mean, the food was banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures because it actually happened. I'm not sure what was playing on that one. Reactor 3 completely gone. So why is every nuclear power plant, why are they growing food in a nuclear wasteland? Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms as far as you can see? So the plume fallout in North America, on the other side of the ocean, 5,500 miles away, was 1 million atoms per square meter over the west coast, for instance. This was, I believe, xenon-133 and 135, the same amount also. Late radiation injury after post-operative radiotherapy of breast cancer. So think about radiation therapy, and then think about radiation fallout. Rain with 20 million particles of iodine-131. These particles most likely are the fuel particles that are splitting atoms. They're calling them iodine-131 when they're curium particles. Iodine is produced in a huge ratio. We know for every iodine-131, there's 10 times more iodine-132, and 30 times more iodine-133, and 31 times more iodine-129 for every iodine-131 produced. So that sample would have had the same thing. Iodine-132 and 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing, radiating the thyroid gland than the 131, which is incredibly effective, if that's true. It most likely is a different isotope. They didn't want to use a strong isotope, so they called it iodine-131, because anybody who looks it up will say, well, it's got a short half-life, and then the nuclear industry can breathe a sigh of relief. And we have a lot of evidence suggesting that. I'll show you coming up. Radiation-induced spinal cord injuries. So in your hospitals, they're radiating your loved ones in their worst moments of life, and they have no success record whatsoever. West Coast hit with 220 million atoms. This is known to aggregate in the thyroid glands of all species, which means permanent radioactive hormones. If you live 50 million years, you're still not safe. So you better get into shape, because this stuff is not going away for 15 million years. Radiation injury to growth plates. There was another phenomenon that happened in Japan. Reactor 1 and Reactor 2. I'm going to speed this up 200%. It's already at about 14%. I'm going to move for time constraints, I'm going to move it. What's going to happen is the Earth is cracked open. Steam is going to come up and take over that site. That steam is a lethal dose. If you walk and you see the steam wafering up, this is cracks in the ground. This is China syndrome. So the steam immediately, this is 15, 20 times, or 20, 25 times quicker than normal speed. So this is lethal doses. So everywhere this steam, so-called steam, touches is absurd radiation. So 3 sieverts, for instance, will melt your organs after a few minutes. This is thousands and thousands and thousands of sieverts, but everything is covered in this material. So think of taking oil out of your car, your grandfather's old truck when you were a kid. And that'd be black oil. And it wasn't, it would if you splattered, it'd be stuck on everything. Imagine going to a beautiful house with an insect spraying machine and just spraying everything with that oil. Pretty nasty. You can see it. It's going to look bad, right? Well, this is the same thing, except it's radiation and you can't see it. You can't perceive it. Well, you can, but it's too late. So the only people that are dear are the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society, because this went on for years and years. There were 6 places where the earth was split and the steam was coming up was at 10 sieverts per hour. So just because, like, you call it steam, but it's better to describe it as this plume of death that everything it touches, it kills shortly after. 10, 15 minutes later, there is nothing can survive its clutches. So, and then everywhere it lands becomes radiated for millions of years. So they run into a lot of problems where they had to repave the site over and over and over because of these events. Hang with me. Radiation-induced lung injuries. So these plumes I showed you earlier covering Canada, the numbers, you were breathing that. Your loved ones were breathing that. A lot of them probably died since in the last 14, almost 15 years. International Atomic Energy Agency experts predict radioactive cesium will carry across the Pacific to the west coast in Canada in 1 or 2 years. Well, it showed up in the cesium plume showed up in 20 days. The whole planet was covered. Radiation pulmonary injuries. So radiation, you never see radiation cured this or cured that, or you'll never see that. You'll just see radiation injuries before it's radiation death. So International Atomic Energy Agency's role in all of this, which is United Nations, and the type of 30 million one-ton bags of radioactive fallout they spent $48 billion to pick up, you now want to grow food into it. Anna Clark, in her story, a typical International Atomic Energy Agency story that's not controlled by their own medias, the International Atomic Energy Agency is not a regulator. So it's not in a position to judge or approve anything, water, soil, nuclear, waste, or anything else. It's not a regulatory agency. It's United Nations. It's just a company that is constructed by a bunch of globalists known as the League of Nations originally. After Nagasaki, Hiroshima, they became very powerful. They decided they're going to change their name, like Windscale changed it to Sellafield. The League of Nations changed it to United Nations. It was united in one thing only, was just obsessiveness of controlling every facet of humanity and genocides and omnicide. So it's not a regulator. So when they say it's not a regulator and not a position to judge or approve, nothing else matters. In other words, they don't matter. UNSCLEAR, IRPA, the IPRC are the same thing. They're not regulatory agencies. They don't have any sovereignty over any country. But they bullied 195 countries, and militaries have bullied everybody else. So when it comes to man-made and natural stuff, so a typical radioactivity is measured in curies. A curie is 37 billion becquerels, 37 billion atoms, 37 billion atomic disintegrations per second. So 1 becquerel is 1 atom. It pulses energy at the speed of light every second, in every direction, and the speed of light. It's the only perpetual machine we have on the planet. Radiation injuries in the intestines. This is 23 days of the French government spike, not a conjecture and opinion, but a spike, radioactive fallout. Radiation therapy induced cardiac injuries. I want you to think about those studies because this is important. So naturally occurring radionuclides like bananas, potassium is 71 10-millionths of a curie per gram. It's 0.00000071 curies, 37 billion atoms. But it's not even an atom. It's 0.00000007 curies per gram. Well, it's an atom, I guess, but it's not an atom you can make a dirty bomb out of. It's not an atom you can make a chain reaction of. It's not an atom that can give you a tumor or an autoimmune deficiency or illness or injuries. Man-made cesium-137 and strontium-90 is 88 curies per gram. So the comparison is 88 times 37 billion and 140 times 37 billion harmful atoms versus the atoms in the potassium are harmless because your body needs potassium. Everything on the planet has potassium in it. You're acclimated to potassium through genetic superior selection. I'm burping as I'm talking. So man-made curries, potassium-40 is 71 10 millionths of a curie per gram. You can live in a football field packed to the roof of potassium-40 and it can never have any adverse effects on you whatsoever. You can't bioaccumulate it. But you can bioaccumulate every one of the atoms in each one of those grams. In your muscles, your organs, and your bones, where they'll destroy your immune system immediately, flood your body with white blood cells permanently, and you'll die shortly after from that exposure because you're producing more white blood cells than red blood cells, which carry oxygen nutrition. You die of radiation poisoning. So in the food chain, you got water, the producers, zooplankton, small fish, large fish, and 10 million when you get up to the fish-eating birds. Do you eat fish? Well, I got some bad news for you, and you probably rightfully don't want to hear it. So on the low number, 500 days of just 10 atoms per day, the bioaccumulation activity, they say, is 1,400. The atom never goes away. It's in your body pulsing energy every second. So it's 5,000 atoms, not 14,000. They call it Becquerel to confuse you, to manipulate you and deceive you and misrepresent the actual integrity of what's happening. You can't have a Becquerel without an atom. And an atom's not going to pulse 1,400 times a second. You got 1,400 atoms. Using the word Becquerel is a very deceptive technique that they're using forever, for 80 years. Radiation injuries to the nervous system. YouTube responds to accusations of hiding restricted content. Radiation injuries to the canine spinal columns. Radiation injuries to the optical nerves. Radiation injury of the lower digestive tract. YouTube have reality manipulated without our consent. Well, I've been going over 2 hours, only got 16 likes. I've been going over 2 hours, only got 19 votes. I've been going over 2 hours, only got 20 views. I've been going over 2 hours, I got 135 people came by. 135 people, but only got 16 likes. 135 people, and this radiation lasts for millions of years. All right. Radiation-induced cognitive impairment. So radiation has some incredibly bad attributes, to say the least. So this is Sellafield, England. This is a satellite picture of a satellite of a nuclear site, typical, surrounded by farms as far as you can see. It'll contaminate every one of those farms beyond their wildest dreams because they're reprocessing the fuel from their entire country and other countries, and you can't contain the emissions. This industry is just, there is not a single redeeming quality. And every atom that's released is pulsing energy at the speed of light forever and ever and ever. Carbon doesn't do it. Radiation does that. You won't see plumes of radiation cover the planet, of carbon covering the planet. Radiation injuries to the nervous system. Radiation attacks everything. Why would you take a fuel processing site, the most contaminated site in Europe, surrounded by farms, as far as you can see, active farms, when you know you can't contain the emissions, and when you know that the emissions are going to be forever? Like, this is absurdness. This is blatant, in your face genocide. It's blatant. You have 400 plus nuclear plants worldwide doing the exact same thing. You have 1,000 fuel pools doing the exact same thing. And every year to put more fuel into them, so there's more radiation hemorrhaging into the environment each year. So last year was evil. Next year is evil, evil, evil. And the year after has evil, 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 evil emissions from 1,000 different fuel pools doing that evil every day. Radiation-induced insufficiency fractures of the femur 18 years after radiation therapy. You call it radiation therapy, but all it does is destroy your health and your ability to have any kind of recovery. That's what evil looks like, ground food alongside of fuel pools and nuclear sites. Radioactive cleanup at Idaho nuclear site is working. Yeah, really? For the first time in 70 years? The emissions have been going up steady in 70 years. You finally stopped a little bit, did you? Summary of symposium on acute radiation-induced injuries. So when you look at the history of Drevia Bay, I can't even pronounce that properly because it's a Russian word, cleanup reaches a landmark in the dangerous nuclear fuel removing process. This is where they took the spent fuel from nuclear submarines from the Soviet Union and Russia, and they put it in these places and then abandoned them. They abandoned them for decades because they were nuclear wastelands. All of that fuel is splitting atoms directly into the environment, no containment, for 50, 60 years. So it's coming from many different sources, unfortunately. Radiation-induced skin wounds. Is there any redeeming qualities to nuclear whatsoever? La Hague in France can't contain the plutonium or the americium or the strontium. There's endless studies showing that La Hague, Sellafield, Windscale/Sellafield, and Donerae in Scotland, reprocessing sites, contaminated the Arctic and Europe to get there from the fuel reprocessing. All of that is pulsing energy for millions of years, never goes away. Late radiation-induced rectal injuries after treatment, radiation therapy, for cancer of the uterus. Does that sound like a cure to anybody? Stillbirths from offsprings of male radiation workers is Sellafield. They found something to blame it on. Radiation-induced lung injuries, anything but the nuclear site. It couldn't be the nuclear site, had to be something else. Population mixing, I think it was. Science and trans science and radiation risk assessment. Child cancer around nuclear fuel reprocessing plant. Like the cancer clusters, they were trying to blame it on the common flu. Distribution of iodine-129 has always been released into your environment. The longest-lived dangerous isotope that aggregates in the thyroid glands and the pituitary glands and the adrenaline glands has always been released into the environment. Because all their nuclear waste has to fit into an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The only way you can do that is release everything else. Hanford, just from the Manhattan Project, dumped 41 miles of unlined trenches, 450 billion gallons. It's hard to appreciate that number. Particularly when we're talking about atoms, right? But we're talking about gallons. That's equal to an aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once. Like, none of these are my opinions. These are facts. Everything I show you is facts. I'll provide the documentation for, I would imagine, about 90% of my assertions, if not more. It shows you how pathetic my life actually is. That I could do that. The most powerful nuclear detonation ever carried out was equal to almost 4,000 Nagasaki's going off at the same time. That's a nuclear war. Well, it wasn't done in anger, so therefore it's nuclear testing. You shut your pie hole, you chicken neck. That's a nuclear war. It's the same radioactive fallout as 4,000 Nagasaki bombs. They're genius. How is that not a nuclear war? So if a country's the nuclear countries were blowing up their nuclear weapons, poisoning their own people, because they didn't want Russia to do it. They didn't want China to do it. So they just done it to themselves. See? At least Russia didn't do it to you. Dirty Ruskies. We got to fight with them for the next 1,000 years. We got to have a boogeyman. You got any concept of how evil that actually was? All the nuclear testing was a nuclear war. Everything underground was vented into the environment. All of those emissions are still out there, pulsing energy at the speed of light, almost the speed of light, every second. We had this one story, right, where, he was talking about the gammas, the alphas, the neutrons, and betas. He was saying, well, at least it was a beta, because beta doesn't pulse very quick. Well, they all pulse almost the speed of light, but one of them doesn't pulse quite almost the speed of light as the rest of them, right? So just, 100 miles per hour shy. And so he wanted to spin the story, and that's what he came out with. And I was like a dirty little muppet. And what we do over the years, we don't challenge, but we cover nuclear stories where they lie. We come out and provide the evidence that it was a lie, move on to the next lie, because you can't keep up with it in 24 hours, the lies. And it's quite interesting if you can distance yourself from the madness, which is sometimes not my easiest thing to do, but typically I can step back and just talk about it. Released large quantities of radioactive debris into the atmosphere and fell over 7,000 square miles. Oh, I'm pretty sure it done worse than that. Radiation is not like a forest fire where it's great big. We're talking about you put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it. Declassified footage of the largest nuclear bomb ever tested. That's not tested, that's a war. Just all the other weapons were a war. Shockwave so big, in fact, it hit the bomber itself despite being 75 miles away. It was so powerful it prevented the subsequent 5-mile wide fireball from even touching the ground. With the mushroom cloud reaching 42 miles into the air, 7 times higher than Everest, and visible from 620 miles away, people in Norway, Finland even reported seeing a blast of shattered windows. 620 kilometers away. Okay. And see what's around that topic. Just let me, not digress, but just let me grab another piece of the pie. Here we go. Got lucky that time. Had my eye on the prize. This is just the Marshall Islands. This is just one study. So, cesium, not uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, curium, all the other isotopes, in fruit from the northern Marshall Islands. I said, okay. Radioactive fallout from the testing program contaminated a huge swath of land and ocean extending over 1 million square kilometers, of severely impacting the habitability of the affected atolls. 1 million square kilometers. So there's 1 million square kilometers full of atoms pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. The French Polynesians suffered the equivalent of a Nagasaki day for 12 years, right? Because the French bombs progressively got bigger into the megatons. So all that radiation still pulsing energy to the speed of light every second worldwide. It's assimilated in your trees, your plants, it's in your upper troposphere and atmosphere. You know, that Soviet bomb, it ate the air. It atomized and aerosoled the air. And all the material, right, was a plume that was splitting atoms. So, let me get out of the way. Back to this one for a second. Castle Bravo was equal to 1,000 Nagasaki bombs. The Russian bomb was equal to 4,000 Nagasaki bombs. Extending over 1 million square kilometers, severely impacted habitability of the affected atolls. Just 1 million square kilometers pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. Every person who goes to the hospital with radiation ends up pulsing energy at the speed of light for their lifetime, especially when they're being injected with it. Radiation therapy induced cardiac injuries. Radiation therapy caused cardiac injuries. Okay. 350 nuclear bombs and ongoing suffering. The shameful history of nuclear testing in Australia. They also detonated the British, the Merriling Montebello. They also were out to Christmas Island, by the way. They went to Australia because they didn't want to radiate their own land too much. Sellafield done enough of that, I'm guessing. They detonated 700 dirty bombs. Like some of these bombs were like 50 pounds of plutonium wrapped up with conventional explosives. And the testimony from the scientists who had to go out and find it, they used to wait for the wind to blow over Australia. They would have like 30, 40 airplanes up monitoring the weather. They were really good. They were fantastic back in those days at that technique, by the way. And when the winds were blown across Australia, they would set the bombs off. And radiation in one of the biggest cities there was at like 90,000 counts per minute of just gamma. Shameful history is right. So sex ratio studies for atmospheric nuclear testing. So the idea is atmospheric nuclear testing contaminated everybody in Italy. And so if you do a sex ratio study of males to females, if there's more males than females, that quantifies radiation injury to the population. But it's going to be true for all species. And so the more males than females, the less species you have. The Keystone disaster, the largest nuclear disaster you never heard of. They like to lie, so don't worry about that. Ignore all that. Even the town is a misdirection because it didn't happen in Keystone. It was Cheroblinka, 65. They have a lake there. If you go in the lake, you'll die. If you're on a boat on the lake for an hour, you'll be dead. The Mayak Production Association runs the plutonium faculty facility, number 817. Radioactive waste was disposed by dumping into the Tetra River. You know, I've been at this 24 years. Years and years ago, I had a study showing 7,500 little tiny communities all along the Tetra River were eventually taken out of there because of the radiation they had dumped during their so-called Manhattan Project. They had a Manhattan Project too, right? At the top of the Tetra River, in the Urals, in the mountains. A waste tank exploded, sending a cloud of radioactive material into the air because they had gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas. So the tank had a chain reaction and actually exploded from the hydrogen buildup, which fell over an area of 20,000 square kilometers. 20,000 square kilometers. Well, it was a lot worse than that, I can tell you that much. Though 270,000 people lived there, only 11,000 were evacuated, and it took 2 years to accomplish that. 2 years. They have no way of protecting you anywhere on the planet. They don't want to. They won't. Within a few days, 300 of the village 5,000 residents died of radiation poisoning, so they were forced to evacuate them, see? Radiation-induced eye injuries in dogs. Oh, you wouldn't believe the 1 billion-plus dogs they killed with radiation. Never cured a single one. Surgical treatment of radiation injuries of the colon and rectum. List of civilian nuclear accidents, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. All of that is out there pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. And it started with Chalk River in 1952 and it never stopped. But the nuclear bombs were the same thing. They were worse than nuclear accidents. They were catastrophic releases. The cancer epidemic started in the 70s. Several decades after radiation therapy, I got some bad news. Look Britain's nuclear veterans in the eye, Prime Minister, and tell them they're imagining their health issues. It would have been cheaper, well, it would have been better to give everybody in British and Ostrich to buy nuclear weapons that you can't use. That's the amount of money they spend. Introduction of radiation injury, another silent epidemic. The world has no concept of what that statement actually means. Shocking state of the world's riskiest nuclear waste sites, Sellafield, surrounded by farms. The world's worst nuclear waste site, 1,000 buildings, it's hard to see it here, surrounded by farms. Constantly hemorrhaging radiation up those skinny stacks. And they got buildings there they haven't been in 50 years. They got fuel pools that are outdoors, splitting atoms directly into the environment, where you just let the water run in there constantly. They can't go near it. Radiation-induced injuries to the visual pathways. Sellafield was all contaminated. The milk, the chickens, the golf courses. Yet he hid it away. They contaminate the whole country. People weren't even told. Radiation injuries, induced cardiac injuries, so many of them, so many bowel injuries from radiation, so many rectal injuries from radiation. The dangers of Rocky Flats are forgotten but not gone. Rocky Flats? Holy shit, man, what they got away with? The FBI finally had to go in there and shut it down. They were that evil. Those releases are all out there pulsing energy at the speed of light for millions of years. You know, climate change. Radiation-induced kidney injuries. Hanford cleanup cost triples because it's so carbon-free, I guess. At worst, it could be $677 billion more dollars. That is still not going to clean it up. Like, they got 177 tanks with 300,000 gallons in a tank. Right? That's the tank farm. But there's another tank farm with 1.4 million tanks and 41 miles of unlined trenches where they didn't use tanks. Instead, they dug 41 miles of unlined trenches and dumped a nuclear sludge that was dehydrated, so hideous amounts released into the environment. All of that is still out there pulsing energy on the speed of light every second. Hypoxia, you kill, your body is producing white blood cells instead of red blood cells, so there's no oxygen. Chronic radiation-induced lung injuries. You look at that from radiation failure. Russia has 18,000 dumps in the Arctic. 17 ships and barges loaded with radioactive waste are dumped there. France acknowledges they got 200,000 barrels dumped off their coastline. Britain was out and dumped for 30 years straight with multiple container ships or cargo ships out pushing 45-gallon drums of nuclear waste into the ocean for over 30 years straight. And the barrels are crimped on top and the bottom, so as it sinks, it compresses per atmosphere 33 feet, 14.6 pounds per square inch. And then when it gets down a couple of atmospheres, 100 feet, 3 atmospheres, it compresses so much, the bottom and the top, one of them will come off or boat, well, most likely boat. And what that means is all the nuclear waste is released before it even hits the bottom. It's all in the ocean, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, ingested and destroying the health of every species and their reproduction abilities. It was all kept secret. The kerosene was used for a nuclear dump. Blood spinal cord barrier disruption, central nervous system radiation injuries. This is from a hospital, radiation therapy. All of these studies are radiation therapy. Not this one. This one is hilarious. This is a submarine. I was looking for this study for quite a while, and I couldn't remember where I put it. I've got to put that in my old shit pile here right now. So they went out, and they found that neither the submarine, nor the hull, nor the reactor vessel will be destroyed by corrosion for at least 1,000 years. Is there anybody gullible enough to believe a nuclear sub will sit on the ocean for 1,000 years and not rust? Is there anybody? No, I'm not even going to ask. Like, this is a academic study saying that the radiation won't get out of the reactor for at least 1,000 years. It's absurd because the reactor sank in deep water and so it crushed. The radiation was never stopped releasing. But it's don't matter. They got a study, and so shut up. That's what the United Nations is doing to you, the same thing. All of that, despite the denialism, is out there pulsing energy at the speed of light for millions of years in every species, and it's destroying the health and the reproduction of all the species for hundreds of miles in that area, which is a prime nursery. Feds fear EMP meltdown of nuclear power plant. If you get electric magnetic pulse from the sun strong enough, every nuclear reactor will melt down on the planet. If you destroy the infrastructure like they claim it will. Radiation-induced bowel injuries, ever mention that? Mortality among the United States military participants in 8 above-ground nuclear weapons test series. 235,000 military personnel participated at 1 of 230. Radiation-induced kidney injuries. That's from radiation therapy. Liquid batches of radioactive influences into the ocean. They all do it. Every nuclear power plant on it does it. And every nuclear power plant on the planet has an incinerator or multiple burning radioactive material. They're legally allowed to do it. No opposition allowed. And United Nations, UNSCLEAR, ERPA, the IPRC, International Atomic Energy Agency, all approved it, so shut up. See, this is how can we have a planet, how can we have any future without addressing this? And how come United Nations won't have a debate, I wonder? Central nervous system radiation injuries. The bottom of the landfill. Between 60s and 82, the only answer was to throw them in the sea. Belgium threw 30,000 tons of radioactive waste into the North Atlantic during 15 different operations. Injury to the cranial nerve, nuclide following proton beam radiation therapy. So radiation therapy is probably the scariest fucking thing I ever come across. No thank you. They'll take your child though if you got cancer, you have to give them your child. That's how much control they have over you. And that's done through the United Nations subsidies. You have to give them your child so they can radiate them to try to save them. Because they've never saved a child. What makes you think you're going to be the lucky one in a lottery that nobody wins? Radiation injury to the head and neck. Coalition seeks an extra $7.25 billion for the Department of Energy nuclear cleanup. They need money. 90% of the money, by the way, is stolen through administration on top of that. Every Superfund site out there is just a leech site for the industry to get their kickbacks from. The assessment of radiation-induced brain injuries. $6.4 billion Jacobs contract, nuclear cleanup. Well, yeah, they're going to take a couple of 100 years to clean it up, so we need at least that much each year. 95 radiation-related breast injuries. There's so unrestricted use of Durnford nuclear site in 300 years. That's a pretty good deal. It's a prime piece of real estate in 300 years. They destroyed all the best real estate on the planet with these disease factories. These are disease factories. Spinal cord recovery from radiation injury. Look at all the people in these studies. No, it's totally harmless. Very little is known about radiation, Dane. Oh, I know, yeah. 300 years, you can go back to Durnford. Things are looking up for Scotland. Radiation-induced brain necrosis. Homeless and migrant workers exploited to clean up Fukushima because nuclear scientists are not going there. Nuclear academics are not going there. Nuclear universities ain't going to go anywhere near that place. Radiation-induced rectal injuries. Get your radiation-induced rectal injuries. Sign up at the IAEA. Downwinders impacted by the nuclear testing can apply for compensation. Really, the downwinders. So the wind only blows one way? That's interesting. Radiation injuries to the heart valves. You wonder why so many people are having heart attacks and cardiac and respiratory injuries? It's radiation, folks. In 1986, a Russian submarine with 27 nuclear missiles sank and exploded. Oh, that's out there pulsing energy at the speed of light for millions of years. The Soviet Union detonated a nuclear bomb to put out a burning gas well because stupid comes in clusters when you talk about nuclear. The Soviet Union detonated a nuclear bomb to put out a burning gas well because stupid actually exists. Radiation injuries of the central nervous system. Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. The Westinghouse Waltz Mill test reactor meltdown. Good old 2 million gallons of contaminated water. You need something to contaminate the water with, by the way. And disposition. Radioactive fallout. It's fallout. Disposition means fallout. Radiation rectal injuries. Get your radiation rectal injuries. $5. $5. You can have one too. The atomic history of Christmas Island. A tiny island where humanity realized its most lethal potential. Why did we blow up all the tropical paradises on the planet with nuclear weapons? Why would they annihilate them all? So it's going to be 1 million square kilometers around. This is too radioactive for the fish. They'll go there, they'll get sterilized eventually, and they'll stop coming back when the lifespan expires because they stop producing. It was designed a pristine place for the military to be stupid and sadistic. Yeah, we're just going to blow everything up. Nuclear weapons. We'll come back in a couple 100 years. Tally out. This was an interesting story after Fukushima. Twitter used the scientific communications revealed by visualization information spreading of influencers within half a year of Fukushima. So, let me go back to that one for a second. It was something like 95 million tweets came out in a short period. They traced that back to 5 Twitter influencers. And so what they done was just censored those 5 influencers, and everybody stopped getting their feeds. And so the story kind of went away, right? Pretty slick. They've been at this a long time, trust me. U.S. spent nuclear fuel inventory steadily increased from 2013 to 2017. So all the sites are releasing more radiation every day because you're storing it in the pools, which have no containment. The worst case scenario. Everything nuclear is worst case scenario. Acute injury of your glands, salivary, I can't even pronounce it right now. I've been talking for 2 hours, 42 minutes. I'm not even finished. Let me just run through the rest of these. I didn't realize it was 2 hours and 40 minutes. Not that that matters. Radiation-induced bile duct injuries. Experimental study on acute brain radiation injuries. Experimental. They're all experimental. Radiation-induced brain injuries. You ever heard one about the radiation-induced brain injuries? How about the radiation-induced brain injuries? I never heard of that one before, Dana. How about the radiation-induced brain injuries after proton radiotherapy? Radiotherapy means you die, and you die. Next, you die. Oh, you can go home and die. You can't stay here. Go home, let your family lives be destroyed. Modification of radiation, which is the safest place for you, unfortunately. It's too late. But that's what they do with people, right? Like in Canada, they'll steal your kid. They'll spend $900,000 on radiation and chemotherapy, radiochemotherapy. Well, they'll start off with chemo because it's chemicals. And it doesn't sound as bad. Or, it's chemo. And if you keep pestering, they say, well, it's some chemicals. That won't work. And then they'll say, well, we can try radiation chemo. They go, thank you so much, doctor, thank you. And so now the child or their loved ones are dying. And so, well, there's still, proton beams and radiation therapy. There's still a little glimmer of hope. You got to sign this piece of paper. You can't sue us, though. It's not illegal to murder you with radiation. It's not illegal to kill you with radiation. Congress and Parliament don't have the authority. Otherwise, the industry couldn't exist. Brainstem injury after intensively modulated radiation therapy. Like, I've been at this a long time, but it still shocks me. Radiation-induced brain injuries. I've never mentioned that before, I'm pretty sure. I got a folder on nothing about radiation brain injuries like this, all these academics. And none of them said, hey, this is probably not a good idea. Language decline after brain radiation therapy. Radiation-induced brain injuries after radiosurgery of the brain, radiosurgery. At what point do you say this is a bad friggin' deal? This is stupid. They're put in special hospital rooms that are lead-lined so they don't radiate everybody out in the hallway because they're so radioactive. I'll totally cure you. In your fantasies, recurrent brain tumors from radiation injuries. Radiation therapy, right? Study on radiation-induced brain injuries. Just after radiotherapy. Radiotherapy does not cure you. It kills you. It kills every cell in your body and then you. Radiation-induced brain injuries. In fact, their organs will melt. Their organs will be destroyed. They'll die of organ failure. There's no way to save them. And they'll put their die of cancer. Novel clinical, which is given to them by radioactive fallout in the first place. Clinical approaches to reduce brain radiation injuries. They have all these protocols. They have all these seminars. They have all these academic studies. And I mean, holy shit. You should see the full record. This is nothing. And they still haven't come to the conclusion that it doesn't work. No. We'll get it to work, though. Yeah, and they're going to take a couple of billion people. We'll figure it out. Don't give up hope yet. My kid's just going to university. He needs a job, too. Radiation-induced normal brain injuries. Test battery for the assessment of radiation-induced brain injuries. I mentioned there's brain injuries from microwaves before? Radioactive fallout, there's microwaves on top of that. Injuries to the brain from radiation therapy with the whole brain. Brain radionecrosis, that's good boy stuff. After adjuvant radiation therapy. Why do they call it radiation therapy when nobody survives it? Because they won't touch it if they don't call it therapy. We'll put that word therapy, here, take this cyanide therapy. Take some lead therapy, drink a whole bunch of this lead. It's therapy. Yeah, you're probably going to die, but it's therapy, so don't worry about it. You'll be okay. It won't hurt when you did. Cognitive impairment in young patients treated with radiation therapy for a brain tumor caused by radioactive fallout from the radioactive farms, the food they ate. Aging mass detections of radiation-induced brain injuries. Radiation-induced soft tissue injuries to the head and neck. Just saying, right? Late radiation rectal injuries. Oh, that sounds like a hoot. You're okay, going home there, Timmy. 2 months later, I can't sit down on the toilet or anywhere else. I don't know what's going on. Surgical treatment of chest wall radiation-induced injuries. Are you getting the idea from me? Does radiation therapy seem like something reasonable to anybody? Or am I just being a big wuss? Radiation injury to the nervous system. That sounds like if you're eating food from there, you can expect all of this, by the way. Radiation-induced skin necrosis. You don't need to go. You just got to go to a local farm. Radiation injuries to the canine spinal cord. Yeah, they had no idea, Dana. Very little is known about radiation. Radiation-induced death. Of course, there's radiation-induced death. This is all radiation-induced death. Brain radionecrosis after adjuvant radiation therapy. Oh, did I mention you get acute radiation injuries? Radiation lung injury. So you go get radiation therapy, and you got tumor here, tumors there, tumors everywhere else, but the main tumor is not too bad. But now you got another 10 tumors everywhere else. You know, after Fukushima, the journalists were so blatant when they were doing, these talks were published on YouTube's.
My name is Martin Fackler. I am the Tokyo Bureau Chief. And the title, as we just heard, was Challenges and Opportunities After the Fukushima Nuclear Disaster, this crisis management. And the question of what do you tell your public?
What do you tell the slaves? Do that again.
My name is Martin Fackler. I am the Tokyo Bureau Chief. And the title, as we just heard, was Challenges and Opportunities After the Fukushima Nuclear Disaster, this crisis management. And the question of what do you tell your public? You know, I mean, do you tell them that there's a serious nuclear accident, or do you play it down? Do you try to cover it up?
Do you play it down? Do you cover it up? Well, if you show them this, they're all going to scream. Can't show them this, so he's laughing about it too, eh? Plutonium from Sellafield in every child's tooth. Their baby tooth. They done this experiment where they collected baby teeth, and they're like, oh crap. So you got all this all these nuclear meltdowns creates all this havoc, but then you got all the other stuff, all the nuclear dumps, all the nuclear testing, the nuclear war machine, the depleted uranium that is not depleted at all. Doomsday-like radiation release of fire in the pool at Unit 4. That'd be a global catastrophe, I tell you what. It had already been. But it would dwarf what's already happened. Nuclear waste expert. Like, this is 2012. This is early 2012. Everything's gone. It's a global catastrophe. But it's not the only one, but this was a pulse event. I believe the country would be evacuated if number 4 fuel pool collapsed. Well, that looks collapsed to me. I don't know about you, but I'm a pretty realistic type guy. 16,000 homeless have quit. Severe radiation, not working conditions, but severe radiation. If the whole planet is covered, according to the French government study, it's not an opinion, it's not a projection, this is a fact, 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. So we launched emergency research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. We went back for 5 more years because the species to your left were missing. So all the species were gone. That was a commercial diver. for 14 years. And I knew all these species, not by name or nothing, but I worked 6 hours a day on the ocean floor for years and years and years, 100 days at a time, back to back, year after year. And so I was very familiar with all the species to your left. So you could never take, like my Zodiac deer, I could never go on a typical beach anywhere in British Columbia. Is 27,000 islands, because sea urchins would take you out right away. We went back for 5 more years to see if the species recovered. The species didn't recover. All right, we made it, believe it or not. And I knew this coming into it. I couldn't stop piling up as usual. And I said, you know what? This is an important show. And I haven't covered, by any shape or means, all the nuclear emitters into the environment or the ecosystem. Everything's ever emitted for 80 years, from 1,000 fuel pools, 460 nuclear plants at one time, all the test reactors, all the national laboratories, all the endless dumping, is still out there pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second for millions and millions of years. And I got 17 likes 3 hours later. I got 19 votes. So that was suppressed brutally again tonight. I'll repost this show at my BitChute channel, environmentalist Dana Durnford. It won't be tonight because it's 1 o'clock in the morning probably here. My shows usually end at midnight. I do my shows as a courtesy so there's less noise for everybody. I've been at this for a long time, for over almost 2.5 decades now. So let's go back to the official narrative, because they won't tell you. Like, if you ask United Nations or the rest of them, what's climate change, they'll say, well, the science is settled. And you say, well, what's the science? Well, it don't matter, because the science is settled. Just do what we tell you. Don't ask questions, please. Well, they won't even say that. All the whales are emaciated and starved to death. All the birds are. So, United Nations stole, or I call it stole, just because I think it's a more appropriate way of putting it, because it was used for nefarious purposes. United Nations stole Wallace Brocker's paper on global warming. They stole Professor Miles Allen paper on net zero. They stole BP Oil's public relation campaign of carbon footprint. And they stole Jim the Monster, 15-minute Jim, Jumping Jimmy, Jesus, global warming, climate change narrative. He gave a testimony for 15 minutes, and then his 15-minute was the official beginning of the global warming policy debate. It was pivotal and the official beginning of the global warming policy debate. Not United Nations, didn't come up with any of that. So those 4 papers, James Hansen, BP Oil, Miles Allen, and Wallace Brocker, are the 4 papers they're basing their climate change on, which is carbon. And carbon is recycled into other species, trees, plants, fruit, insects. Carbon doesn't hurt anything. Without carbon, you're going to look like the moon, right? So what I showed you was that the radioactive fallout is real, the radioactive emissions are real, and that they're enormous and they're in every capacity from every direction. You can't even comprehend anymore. And one of the biggest ongoing perpetual releases is the spent fuel pools worldwide of every reactor site and fuel processing site and national laboratory site is hemorrhaging radiation from the spent fuel pools. There's no containment. It's dirty bombs on a scale in 24 hours that are way past the Google numbers, for instance. Because Google is a number, right? The show will continue on Sunday. I wasn't going to do a show tonight. I was so upset with that article that they're going to censor everybody. They have this. It was unreal. It took us 45 minutes or something to cover the original story. And it took me 2 hours to show you the evidence of what's really going on. I'm not making nothing up. I'm not faking anything. I'm not misrepresenting anything. I'm not exaggerating anything. I'm downplaying every facet of the stories. And it's a terrible industry. And now they want to what? Triple the capacity worldwide of these disease factories. Pretend nothing has ever happened. A big shout out to James Lucet, donated almost 300, and Dana Nasana donated 130. That was awesome, by the way. Good timing. And you wouldn't believe how messed up I was this morning when I woke up. I could barely move. I started exercising, got in sauna for 25 minutes. I sweated much better today for some reason. And under the red therapy light. And so I felt really great after that, I must admit. So the radioactive fall air covered the whole planet. It never stops pulsing energy at the speed light every second. That's worldwide. 1,000 fuel pools are producing plumes. So if you take a fuel pool, you take the reactor core, 1/3 of it, and put it into a fuel pool, it's going to produce a plume bigger than that. And this plume is based up on 32, 33 days or something. And so this is the French government of 10 million atoms of cesium-137 covering the entire planet. Every nuclear power plant's fuel pool originally will make a plume like that, and it never stops emitting. And you have 1,000 fuel pools producing plumes like this. And this particular model is based on a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of the inventories that were lost. And now we're losing all the species to severe emaciation. This was 2 weeks ago. This bronze whale to your left is considered emaciated. The one to the right is unbelievable. This was 2 weeks ago in India. And like the killer whales showing up severe emaciated, also in New Zealand showing up severely emaciated. You can tell by the tail and the rib cages, right? All the species are missing, so they're not coming back. So a nuclear power plant would take a water. That water over there would normally have 1 billion creatures, 75 to 100 million of them creatures in a glass of water would be the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain. So a nuclear reactor will boil 16 million, well, it's 1 million gallons a minute, so 16 million billion creatures a minute per reactor core is boiled off. The eggs, the larvae, the small microscopic creatures, the milk, the sperm of all these species. In the summertime, your water should not be clear, right? That's spring or fall. I was out doing these research expeditions for 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year where they're coming home post-Fukushima, because the evidence we had was overwhelming. So we're going to end the show tonight on... I was going to play nuclear exceptionalism. I know I'm tired when I'm starting to slur all my words. Nuclear exceptionalism. Thanks for everybody. See everybody on the next show. Don't forget to vote on the poll. We got brutalized 19 votes, 17 likes. I've never seen that before. Thanks for everybody. Take care. I'm not the bad guy. I'm trying to do the right thing. Take Take care.
Was safely sealed in drums, but left them leaking out of Idaho slums. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. They chase the sun, all fusion proud. Ignore the barrels stacked in clouds. Promise stars in every socket, while curium settled in the market. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. Chart is clean, while whales rolled up beside the submarine. Blame the algae, blame the rain, but never trace the gamma chain. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. Now the rods are rusting, the record spins. Mama warned them, too many sins. Keep your son, keep your lab coat pride, till you fix the waste you tried to hide.